Or record. Hey, welcome back to another episode number 8 of Virginia is for Conspiracy Lovers. As always, I got my main man Daniel with me, and we got another Daniel with us today. Dan, you want to fill everybody in on why you've been slacking and been gone for 2 weeks, or?
Why I've been slacking. Yeah, well, I think it might be because we've started doing this podcast and we've
Yeah.
awakened some things that have taken issue with some of the
You
conversations we've had. That's where I wanted to go with that. It's all your fault, basically.
correct me if I'm wrong, but you've had two head injuries and a broken foot in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it all started with a bizarre incident at the grocery store where inexplicably, one of my hydraulic rods on my tailgate came out of the socket and then went through the tailgate in the Subaru and shattered the windshield. And I thought that was a little bit strange. And then the following day, our 8-month-old rolled off the bed onto our hardwood floors in this old 1810 house that we live in. And we ended up going to the emergency room to get the scans and everything to make sure everything is okay. Everything is okay, just so everybody knows. But my wife turned around for 30 seconds to go to the bathroom and rinse her hands off, and that's all the time it took for little Flora
Yep.
to
You
go
froze on us,
roly-poly
Danny.
in my back.
Oh, you froze. Well,
I can hear you,
let's
but
all
you're
chat with. Oh, no, you're good now. You're
okay.
back.
I can hear you, but you froze there for a second too.
Okay. So I was just mumbling like a moron for a minute.
That's all right. And then, later in the same day as the rolling off the bed incident, we had some people over for a birthday get together, and Charles walked in front of someone that was throwing a rock and it hit him in the head. There was blood gushing everywhere. I mean, it looked like something out of a horror film, truly. It was all coming down the side of his neck and soaked his shirt. I mean, it looked awful, but ended up just being a small cut on his head. And then 2 days later, I was out to lunch with someone from economic development, and while I wasn't home, luckily not with Flora, Hannah tripped down the stairs and broke her foot in 3 places.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
That's that bad juju. You start talking about the Masons and the Templars and whatnot. And
That's why I said it's all your fault. You got
uh,
me into this.
Um, well, tell everybody about our guest, Daniel J. Duke. I am crazy excited about this conversation. I could talk to this guy for days. So let
Yeah,
him know.
let me pull this up here. Yes, Mr. Dan Duke has written a couple of books. He's a distinguished authority on the captivating legacy of Jesse James and the intriguing connections to the Knights Templar. So that's something that's probably got Ernie pretty excited. He's hailing from Texas, which apparently is already very hot, and draws inspiration from the region's rich cultural heritage, infusing his work with an authentic sense of time and place. As an accomplished author, Duke's nonfiction works weave together the threads of the past and present. With meticulous attention to detail and captivating storytelling, he unveils hidden chapters of history and illuminates the intricate connections between his family's outlaw lineage, Freemasonry, and the Knights Templar. Duke's books challenge conventional narratives and reveal concealed truths, inviting readers to immerse themselves in the secrets and legends that have shaped our world. Through his captivating works, Duke provides an unparalleled opportunity to delve into concealed histories and unearth the forgotten secrets that lie at the very heart of our shared past. He's written a few books, to name them: Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, The Mysterious Life and Faked Death of Jesse James, and The Secret History of the Wild, Wild West. So, Mr. Duke, welcome to the show.
Ladies
Thanks
and
for having
gentlemen. Well, yeah, welcome to the show. So glad I got back in touch with you. It's I'll just the way I originally got in touch with Dan was that me and the wife and kids were going on a vacation to Hilton Head a number of years back, and I needed a book to read on the beach. and I don't know, I don't even remember where I bought it, but I was walking through somewhere looking in my normal, probably Barnes and Noble around esoteric or um conspiracy area, and I saw Jesse James and Lost Templar Treasure, and I was like, oh yeah, that's me. And I think I made it like 20 pages into that book before um I got to like a photograph and an explanation about Jesse James hiding out in Williamsburg sometimes. And then not only that, Dan had found this Kabbalistic tree of life in the layout of the campus of William and Mary, which is part of my research. And I didn't want to be rude or anything, but I immediately found his probably through the publisher or something like that, found an emailed him and was like, dude, check out my Kabbalistic tree of life in William and Mary. I think you could add on to yours. And he hit me back like, I think by the next day, and was like, dude, I just published this book like months ago. He was like, you're right. There's more. And then we just kept talking back and forth, trading. I had no idea growing up in Williamsburg, Virginia, had no idea that that was a place that Jesse James used to kind of hide out. I didn't have any idea. I mean, I have my own ideas about treasure and buried vaults and things like that in Williamsburg, and they fall right into Dan's research. But that's enough about me because I am lame compared to the real life great grandson.
Yeah, great grandson.
Great grandson of the real Jesse James. And I'm gonna wind you up and let you go, man, because I'll just touch on a few points and then let you kind of go with your story because it's incredible. So yeah, if there's anything you want to get off your chest as far as an intro goes, otherwise, man, just go.
All right, you want me to start where everything started off, or it's a
Yeah,
long story.
I was thinking maybe just give us a little bit of for the people who live under a rock who don't know anything about Jesse, just kind of his early history and
Okay.
how he ended up with Contral's Raiders, and
All right.
because that's a gnarly story, and I think it humanizes Jesse a ton. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jesse James, he was an Old West outlaw, is one of the most famous slash infamous. It depends. Half the country back then rooted for him, and they thought of him as like a modern day Robin Hood, and the other half hated him. They thought of him as a bloodthirsty, psychotic murderer. And I thought it depends on what side you fought for. That's what I used to think, but found out later after a lot of research, Frank James, Jesse's brother, they were both outlaws in the same gang, the James Younger gang. Frank said after he was acquitted and Jesse had faked his death, that a lot of their best friends were judges from the North who fought for the North. And I thought that was interesting. You know, it's when I first started researching, and I thought that just blew my mind, because I always thought it was a strict North versus South, and they weren't going to, they were enemies for life kind of thing. Because when you
Marry the
grow up,
twain shall meet.
yeah, you grow up in Central Texas, and I grew up around a lot of people whose ancestors fought for the Confederacy. And, they're like, it's always that damn Yankees this. Anything happened that was wrong, it was always blamed on a damn Yankee. So, then you grow up, you start looking around, you get to see more of the world, and you find out there's a whole lot of gray areas. But I have a habit of running off down different rabbit holes.
You good. We were just talking about Jesse's early life. What got him into
What got him
how
into
he
it
ended
was,
up.
well, like before, a lot of people don't realize before the Civil War started, 8 to 10 years before it started, there was already fighting between abolitionists and pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions. Abolitionists in the New England states were funding a lot of people. Like if you remember some of the history from high school and junior high, John Brown. He was funded by abolitionists, and he'd go around. He killed a lot of people in the name of freeing the slaves. I thought, so you murder a family in the name of freeing people. Anyway, he was captured and hung. But those kind of troubles, and I'm trying to steer clear of the ethics of all of this because that makes a lot of enemies. But it's that too is a gray area. Jesse, the Civil War started. The fighting had been going back and forth, little skirmishes. Kansas was a free state. Missouri was a slave state. Jesse and Frank and his family Jesse and Frank grew up in western Missouri and in Clay County, Missouri. So, they're in a slave state and they're right on the border. And that was where the heat of the action was for years. Redlegs, who were abolitionist, union-backed guerrillas, would raid into Missouri, and they would rob, kill. If you've ever seen the outlaw Josie Wales, that's a really good. The way it starts out is very accurate. It's the kind of life they lived through. Redlegs would ride in and raid Missouri. Missouri would do the same. It was back and forth. And no, it's hard finding who started this all. I know John Brown was one of the earliest figures that I know of, just in the name of freeing slaves, and it just kind of snowballed from there. Then now you've got groups of guerrillas riding back and forth. I mean, they even had preachers on both sides, and there's documented stories of this. Preacher knew a red leg preacher who had a church, and he wanted his piano, so he'd kill him and take his piano. Stuff like that, or their organ or whatever. Yet, when the Civil War started, Frank James was in a Confederacy, and he was already fighting, but Jesse was too young to join. So Jesse, Frank was away fighting. Jesse was on his farm plowing the field. He was about 14 years old. A group of Union-backed guerrillas from Kansas rode onto their farm. They strapped Jesse to a plow, beat him severely, rode down to the farmhouse, and pushed his mother around. There's different accounts of what happened to his mother. Some say they stripped her blouse off, strapped her to a tree, and horsewhipped her. Others say they just pushed her around. Either way, she was a woman, and back then you didn't touch women like that. Much less your own mother.
And that was Zerelda, right? Was her name?
Yeah, Zerelda.
Yeah, she'll come back up later. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So Zerelda was pregnant at the time, which made it that much worse. But just for publicity. I mean, pushing a pregnant woman around. Then they hung his stepfather, and I try not to get too detailed in a lot of this, but his stepfather, Dr. Reuben Samuel, they hung him, but they didn't kill him. It caused permanent brain damage, though. So Jesse, after they left, Jesse, just like any boy, I would have done the same thing, especially at that age. You want revenge. And he tried to join the Confederacy. He was too young. Everybody was telling him, which I found odd because there's stories of child soldiers,
real young guys
throughout the Civil War. And I thought that was odd. That I don't know if that was an excuse or if he knew about Quantrill and wanted to find the group, the worst
going to do the most damage.
Somebody who didn't give a damn, and they were going to just do the most damage. So and you've got to excuse my language. I've been alone in the woods for too long.
Don't worry about it, my man. You're in good company.
Anyway, you start reverting back. I catch myself reverting back to the rural area I grew up in. So, anyway, Jesse wanted revenge. The story goes that he was too young to fight with the legitimate Confederate forces, which I don't really buy. But he found Quantrill's guerrillas, and they said, they took him on. And he rode under Quantrill. Quantrill was the top guy, but his Captain Bloody Bill Anderson, William Anderson, and he was rumored to be the most deadly guerrilla at the time. I mean, bloodthirsty. He was out for blood, and that's all he cared about. No quarter. All of Quantrill's guerrillas rode under what they say they rode under the black flag. And there's different versions of the flag. Nobody knows how accurate how accurate it was. Some guerrillas said they never had a flag, but symbolically they gave no quarter. Kind of like land pirates.
Yeah. So just before we move on, just for people who don't know, Quantrill's guerrillas, Quantrill's raiders, the guerrilla forces back then in the Civil War, they were doing everything from helping out almost as like cavalry in a regular battle, and then also doing night missions and ambushes and even robbing supply trains and robbing payrolls and things like that. So they were like the epitome of a guerrilla force. They were Navy SEALs, and they were, at times I know at certain times they were just extra bodies for the battle too, for in these standard battles.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I've said. I've told people when I was on the History Channel, I said, if you can imagine, they were the special, like elite special forces of their day. I mean, and it was all on horseback. They didn't mind. They didn't care to fight on foot unless they had to. But I mean, they preferred it was on horseback. And like you said, they guarded their territory, and they also did raids. A lot of historians have claimed that Quantrill and all his forces weren't regular Confederate forces. Then they weren't officially a part of the Confederacy.
So they weren't like enlisted guys. They were just like,
well, that's what they've said, but we found records over the years that show they were. Quantrill was definitely an official part of the Confederacy. And I think a lot of that came because back in those days, if you were a guerrilla, that was frowned upon. They, they were still, the honor in war and the way they were. I guess the regular forces were fighting the old style, and Quantrill and them were their way was the most effective way, especially against superior forces.
Okay, it's kind of like the the spy thing where if you're caught, then we'll deny you're actually part of
disavowed,
this organization, disavowed. Yeah, but it was a total. Well, one of the earlier examples of kind of a total war philosophy over,
Yeah. And, exactly. It was like we can neither confirm nor deny, blah, blah, blah. But you're exactly right. So they fought, they killed, they were very good at what they did. They killed a lot of people. Jesse was 14, some say 15, when he started riding with Quantrill's guerrillas under William Bloody Bill Anderson. And Jesse quickly became one of their deadliest guerrillas. And I also think that has a lot to do with being a teenager. Most teenage boys don't have much of a conscience, and they really don't have any fear. They think everybody's going to die but them. So, so I think that I remember I read a quote from somebody. I wish I could remember who said it. Basically, the most dangerous creature on earth is a teenage boy.
Yep. I concur.
No guilt, no conscience.
So all right. So he, has this traumatic experience as a kid, joins up with the bloodiest group that he can so that he can meet that back out on the Union guys that essentially did that to his family. He's 14 or 15 when he goes in. At the end of the Civil War, about how old is he? Not knowing when he went in, and
he was probably 18 I would say 18, most likely 18 is what we've come up with.
About 18 years old, and he's
maybe younger. It could have been.
He's immediately labeled an outlaw at the end of the Civil War because everybody was pardoned except for the guerrillas and the raiders and whatnot. All those disavowed, non-enlisted, SEALs, basically. They were wanted dead or alive, and so he went from. I just think it humanizes him a little bit to think about the fact that he was a 14-year-old kid, watched his mom and his stepdad beaten half to death, beaten himself tied to a plow, then goes and sees some of the gnarliest, bloodiest battles you can imagine, and then has no chance to do anything else after that. I mean, he really doesn't. He's labeled. He's an outlaw, and the force, war's over. Now everybody in the Union Army, has an eye out for him.
Yeah.
And so
they
what
had
other choice did he have except to,
That's true. He tried to, well, like you said, they weren't granted amnesty because they weren't deemed an official part of the Confederacy, so they weren't granted amnesty, and it was a lot like the outlaw Josie Wells movie in that part of his life. You're not granted amnesty, you're an outlaw. Those who surrendered were executed, sometimes shot on sight. Other times they'd give them a mock trial and hang them. And the others, if you didn't turn yourself in, you were hunted down like a dog. And that's just how they did it. Jesse tried to surrender at the end of the war and got a bullet through his right lung for his efforts.
Right.
He came up on a Union picket to surrender, and they shot him. And I don't know how he lived through that. They said for years, for about a decade after that, he would have to drain the wound off and on. He'd get an infection, and he would drain it himself. And we've got his day. It wasn't a diary. It's his journal. He didn't write about his feelings. I always laugh about that. He never wrote about his feelings. He just wrote the facts. The one we have is from 1871 to 1876. And he would talk about woke up in the night with chills, took some powders. And I don't know what the powders were. It could have been anything back then, but he took powders, and I guess that killed. Maybe it was a painkiller. I don't know. But maybe morphine, aspirin, who knows? But
sort of.
Yeah. So so I know well after the Civil War, he had chills in the night for a long portion of his life.
Well, that could have just been PTSD. Good Lord. I mean,
yeah, that could have been.
That you used to call it shell shock after Vietnam or whatever. I mean, I can't imagine going through that kind of any of those Civil War soldiers. All right, so we could probably. I don't think we need to get into the nitty gritty too much of the Jesse James bank robbing era. I mean, it's super important to know he knocked off a lot of banks with the Youngers, but I feel like that is the one that period there is probably the most known, and I want to get a little further on to the juicier stuff, but they knocked off a lot of banks. They made the first bank robbery, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't like 60 grand they got away with or something like that.
A lot of people say it was 60,000 or close to it, and that was Liberty, Missouri. I mean, it was the bank in Liberty, Missouri. It was the first daylight peacetime bank robbery first recorded daylight peacetime bank robbery. And I always laugh at peacetime because, God, after the war, there wasn't much peace at all. There was still, little pockets of resistance in different areas.
Right.
But like John Wesley
Texas, they didn't know it was over for like a year.
Yeah. John Wesley Hardin. He was a perfect example of the Texas side of it. His family, he had a plantation. They had slaves. He was a teenage boy, and this is a whole different topic, but John Wesley Hardin was a teenage boy. They lost everything. He was bitter, pissed off, riding into town for something, and a black Union soldier stopped him and told him, give me your guns. And he said, I'll give you my damn guns, and shot him in the face. And that started John Wesley Hardin's career.
Wow.
But he was more of I think he always reminded me almost of an Old West serial killer. He just went around killing
people. Yeah. I think there's a difference between, it's a spectrum, I'm sure. So basically for the next, how many years would you say? I mean, it was a pretty long run for an outlaw, right?
Yeah, he went along. Well, he never really stopped. He did stop the robbing, but other people kept it on. And this is where it gets our
murky.
and I'm trying to find the right word for it. It's hard. Murky. That's a good word. It gets strange. A lot of people don't realize, okay, so he had his outlaw career, the Jameses, the Youngers. And one more thing about the Civil War, the Younger brothers, their dad was a Union supporter when all
That's
that
right.
started.
And they didn't get into it until
later. It was around the same time.
The same kind of thing happened to them, right?
Yeah. Their dad was going to town to do some business. He was a Union supporter, and Union-backed guerrillas from Kansas robbed him and murdered him on the side of the road, and on the road. And so that led to the younger, the younger brothers wanted revenge just like Jesse did. And I'm sure there are countless stories similar to that. And It wasn't so much politics, slavery versus anti-slavery. It was, they wanted revenge. And that's, after your family gets murdered, I could see exactly why somebody would do that. And it was like a whole generation of child soldiers.
Yeah. And they were, except for some of the old timers, I mean, the children who fought in the war were all that was left there for a generation, So Civil War ends. Jesse, the James Younger gang, they start knocking off banks. They amass a lot of money, but I mean, it's recorded. It's not recorded how much they saved, but
the take from each hit.
And for that many years, I mean, it was from generally Jesse's time until he was. What year did he supposedly die?
Well, the first time he tried to fake his death was 1879, but the one that everybody bought was 1882.
So that's, I mean, at least 15 years of.
Yeah, that was a long time of robbing.
That's a long time. And amassing
17 years.
Yeah, amassing all that money. Okay. So he is the official story about Jesse James's death is that he had just taken on. This is wait do you hear this stuff, Daniel? It is off the wall, man. I love it. So he had just taken on the Ford brothers. Was it both brothers or just Bob Ford?
It was supposedly both.
Okay, Bob and Charlie just Ford. Took on Bob Ford and his brother into the gang.
And that was after the Northfield, Minnesota.
When he's like kind of re-upping his gang
robbery. Yeah, but we don't believe Jesse was at that robbery, and that's another thing a lot of people don't realize. A lot of the robberies he was accused of doing, he wasn't there. Not all. Of course, he robbed stages. They even robbed a steamship, and we've got that part documented in his journal or day book. But they used the same tactics they learned as guerrillas. You'd split forces and hit several targets at the same time, and they'd meet at a predetermined place. A lot of the treasure they took, they already knew where they were going to bury it or drop it off at. It wasn't like they weren't riding around the West with bags, of gold weighing their horses down. So
that leads to later on in the story, these maps and the templates and the connections to secret societies.
But they had robbed part of the gang had tried to rob the Northfield, Minnesota bank, and that's billed as the downfall of the James gang, because the younger brothers were there. They got shot to pieces. Oh God, now I'm starting to forget names. I haven't slept for about 24 hours. So
no.
I couldn't sleep last night. So now I'm just crazy on coffee. But so if I start talking too fast, let me know and I'll.
You're all right, man.
Oh God, I wish I could remember the guy's name. It was Charlie Pitts. Charlie Pitts was killed. The younger brothers were shot to pieces. Jim Younger got a bullet through his jaw, shattered his teeth, and one of his jaws. then they ended up going to prison for years. They didn't get released until, I can't remember the exact year. It was early 1900s.
Oh, wow.
So they were in prison for a while. Jim ended up killing himself because he fell in love with a woman while he was in prison. And then the state wouldn't let him marry her because he was a prisoner, so he hung himself.
Oh, wow.
There's stories like, I mean, it was a bad ending for the Younger brothers. Cole Younger lived and went on with his life. He lived to a fair, I think he died around 1914 or 15. Don't quote me on it, though. The dates, there's so many dates to remember. Anyway, trying to get back to where I was starting at with that.
Oh, we were talking about the
Northfield.
Fords.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize that Northfield, I looked into the shareholders of the bank in Minnesota. One of the guys was Silver Spoon's butler, Yankee general, who was known for his horrible, brutal tactics. Went through Louisiana and just made a name for himself as a very brutal man. And they called him Silver Spoons because he was known. He and his men would wipe out everybody on a plantation and steal everything they could. Like the silverware, stuff like that. But he was one of the shareholders in that bank, and so was I believe it was his son-in-law. And that was one of the main reasons, I believe, for them targeting that bank. So
that makes sense.
And there's a couple other historians who have said basically the same thing, but
a little extra retribution.
And there's weird ties with that because Silver Spoons was friends with Rockefeller and the Pinkertons. Alan Pinkerton had also worked for Rockefeller. If Irish miners were rioting for more pay or better conditions, there were cases where the Pinkertons would drop dynamite down in the mine and blow them up just to shut up the riot. They didn't play nice.
Yeah,
so
the Pinkertons they started off in the hole there, man. They working for the Rockefellers. They kind of they were kind of created to be.
That name remind me of the Rockefeller name because that ties back around to Williamsburg.
Daniel knows that's one of my the Rockefellers. Trust me.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite topics. So after that failed bank robbery, they're down some guys and they start recruiting some other guys, and the Fords they end up being connected. And I just listened to your 2-part episode with Richard Serrett. I re-listened to that, and I caught some things that I must have missed in the book or just missed in general. But so we know later on in the story that a connection emerges between the Fords and the Jameses, but at that point, I'm guessing they recruited them because they knew them somewhat from the area.
Well, they knew them, and one of the gang members was also Woodhite. That was Jesse and Frank's cousin.
And that's going to be important later too. So they bring in. I want to jump over all that stuff, but just to kind of keep this the kind of like mainstream timeline, Confederate soldier, bank robber, recruits Bob Ford, the guy who's going to supposedly kill him down the road. Bob Ford does some robberies and things with him, and then at some point Bob Ford shoots him in the back of the head in a town in Missouri.
Yeah, in St. Joseph, Missouri is where it was supposed to have happened.
Okay. And so what I want you to talk about is, before we get into it, just you've been to the house in Missouri where he was supposedly shot. And I believe you talk about how the official story is that Bob Ford shot him to get the reward money for Jesse James. And that the story was that Jesse turned around and stood up on a stool to dust off like a picture on the wall, like a generic, like Home Sweet Home kind of like picture that was hanging on the wall.
They called it a sampler.
Right.
And
But
yeah,
you went to the house, and the ceilings are so low, there'd be no reason for anybody, especially somebody of of
yeah,
Jesse's stature. He was a fairly large guy for the time,
yeah,
correct?
yeah,
And they said
yeah.
you have to be under 5 foot or something like that to need a stool to be able to dust off a picture.
Yeah, I would imagine like just in our a kid, a child, like a third grader might have needed a stool.
Yeah.
Probably a third or fourth grader, maybe 8 to 10 years old, something like that. But a
Right.
man, unless the guy was a dwarf, I don't want to laugh, but
Right.
he
It's okay.
would have. You would, and thinking of dusters, it was a feather duster. They've got a handle on it. You add that to his height. There was no reason the guy needed a stool to stand up on it and dust the sampler. I guess when they're passing it off real quick, people didn't question it. They didn't think about it.
Right. They got Jesse. All right, let's go.
Yeah,
Let's
and all that excitement. It's kind of like there's a God. I wish I could remember the guy's name. I was reading a study. It was a study done. It's called FATE, like fate, but it was a study, a psychological study, where if you put somebody into a new situation, put somebody into a novel situation, and they don't have a mental script for what to do. It's something they've never experienced, something they've never done or been around. You put somebody in that situation, and then you have somebody who's an authority figure. And they've done studies. The studies are crazy. If you ever read about the fate studies, they would get people. They lied to them. They weren't really shocking the person behind the cardboard or whatever.
Right.
But the authority figure would tell the person, shock them, even though it could potentially be a deadly shock.
Oh, I think I listened to a podcast about
Yeah.
that recently where the guys are like,
Yeah, and to me, I just read about this last night, and I'd heard about it before, but I read more about it in detail, and I thought that answers a lot of questions as to why people just go along with whatever. I mean, you could go all through history, Nazi soldiers, whatever. Just follow on board.
Those studies are used a lot, come up a lot when people discuss what would cause SS death squads to just shoot people because somebody said shoot them, and they bring up that study a lot.
You've got the authority figure. They're telling you to do it. You get rewarded for it. If they're your friend, it's like people don't know what they're doing, and it's the mammalian brain taking over, and you're just following orders for that reward of approval, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make it okay, but it is just part of that reptilian brain that it doesn't make it okay, but at the same time, it is that reptilian brain.
Well, what shocked me is they were saying it was the mammalian side of your brain that was responsible for that. And I'm
sure it has something to do with that pack mentality. It
was tribalism.
That's usually what it is. Yeah, it's like you go along with the group because that's what the group is doing, and you don't really raise a lot of your own personal ethical concerns over it.
Well, Daniel, my Daniel, do you have any questions, anything you want to ask before, because it's about to take a hard left into awesomeness?
A hard left into awesomeness, meaning in this Templar direction? Because I have a few questions, I guess, more about sort of the traditional Jesse James story. So one, which I assume we'll get to later, is I've never heard anything about Jesse James having any kind of connection to Williamsburg, so I'm curious to hear about that. But
that was supposed to be second on my list, and I completely skipped over it. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm assuming we're going to talk about that at some point. But I think one of my questions would be, and I'd never heard until you just said it, that this was the second time that Jesse James faked his death. I'd never heard that I've heard about the conspiracies that he'd faked his death. He was still alive somewhere, but I'd never heard that there was a first attempt that was not the Robert Ford attempt.
Yeah. 1879, fellow gang member, he and some of his gang members, were riding. It was in Indian Territory, modern day Oklahoma. in the southeastern corner of modern day Oklahoma. Anyway, so they're riding. George, God, I'm starting to forget their names. I don't know why I do this. George Shepard. I think it's lack of sleep. Sorry about that.
You're good.
Anyway, George Shepard, his fellow gang member, rode into town and claimed that he'd shot Jesse in the back of the head, and they needed to pay up the reward. So, and I thought, my God, it seemed so. It was like everybody seemed so naive when you read the way they were doing things back then. They were deadly; they'd kill you, but at the same time, they didn't seem to have the level of skepticism we all have. And always that cracks me up. But I don't want to get down that side of it. But so George Shepard claimed he shot him. The posse, the sheriff wasn't going to pay him his reward. They wanted to find the body. So they said, take us to the body. They went out there and he claimed I shot him here. You can see where the horses ran. And it sounded like they'd run the horses around and, made it look like a commotion, but there was no blood and there was no body. They didn't find a body. So end of story. That he didn't get his reward and nobody really believed it. And there were quotes in like the Galveston Daily News back then claiming, because Zerelda James, Jesse's mother, would always go, "Oh, my poor baby, he's dead," blah blah. And so they would question her, and she'd lie for him. It was her son, of course she was going to lie for him. But the paper would report things like, as many times as Jesse's died, there's no way you can believe his mother's word on this. So nobody believed it. They didn't find a body, and a couple of weeks later, he was spotted in another town, and that just that it was a failed attempt. He tried to fake his death. They were going to get the reward money and go on. And he was already living in Texas in 1871. He had a wife, Mary Ellen Barron was her name. Her father was Thomas Hudson Barron. He was and I know this sounds crazy, he was an early day Texas Ranger, one of the original 300 in Austin's colony in here in Texas. He came around 1821. I don't want to give that side of the story's more genealogy, but he married Mary Ellen Barron, lived in Blevins, Texas, and they were still robbing, but he was living under the alias of James Lafayette Courtney here in Texas. And I hope I'm not getting off on a different rabbit hole or getting ahead of myself here.
No, you're good. But I did want to, you guys reminded me when you were talking there, and I want to give Daniel a chance to ask his other questions, but real quickly, because this will come up huge down the road. We did touch on the Pinkertons for a minute, but they're very important because when they got involved in hunting down Jesse James, they actually, I think they got word that Jesse might have been at his mother's house, and they threw a bomb into Zerelda's house and blew off the woman's arm. It killed. Did it kill somebody? It killed
his 9-year-old brother.
Killed his 9-year-old half brother and blew off Zerelda's arm, and that'll come back hugely. The fact that anybody disputes with the evidence that the missing armed woman, excuse me, I don't want to make it sound too light, she's a descendant of yours, but the fact that anybody disputes what you guys have found is mind-blowing to me. The mental gymnastics that you have to do to look at your evidence and go, oh yeah, that's just another one-armed woman with the same dress.
Exact same dress, homemade, of course, and the exact same missing arm, and they look just alike, and they're wearing the same style eyeglasses. It was insane. They even had the same jaw that was kind of cocked to the side, and that's a family. It runs in the family. It's like one jaw. Like if I mine isn't as pronounced as hers, but anyway, they looked just alike, same clothes, same missing arm, exactly what you're saying.
Wild. All right, Daniel, go. You had a couple other questions.
Well, I mean, unless this is part of the Templar thing, so the idea that Jesse James faked his death the second time when Robert Ford shot him, and this Jesse James is alive and moving around. I mean, you find this with a lot of famous historical figures. there were the rumors of Adolf Hitler in South America, and Stalin was still alive, and the list goes on and on and on. So what
I
is
think the
the
Hitler one's real though, man.
well,
That
Yeah,
but
is
and there are people
scary.
that think
Argentina's
all of them are
president.
real, and there are
I
people that
know, I
don't think
know.
all of them are real.
It's,
But what's the evidence, I guess, that that didn't happen, that Robert Ford didn't shoot
okay,
him? I mean,
that's where we're
outside
going.
of well, and unless that's going to take us too far down a road, the other question I wanted to ask, and we can go in either order, but of course, Jesse James being one of the most famous American figures in American history of all time, probably.
Yeah.
Um, Jesse James films. Do you have any particular ones that you like, or any particular ones that you
Good question.
despise? One of my
I
personal favorites is the assassination of Jesse James by the coward
Oh
Robert
God,
Ford, because I'm a big fan of
that's
Roger
the
Deakins
one.
as a cinematographer. But I was just curious about your thoughts on that.
that's a
That
great
one is
one.
my least favorite.
That's your least favorite.
I like most of them. I mean, I don't agree with the ending, but like I'd say if I had to name one that was my favorite, it was The Long Riders with the Carradine brothers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That to me was one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Now, do you dislike the Brad Pitt one? Because
I
Brad
think
Pitt
the
was too
acting was
pretty,
great.
or just because it followed the mainstream line too
What,
much?
what I hated about that, and it's not, I don't hate the movie. I think it was great, great cinematography. Um, the guy who wrote the guy who wrote the book that they based that on hated Jesse, and I already knew that, so I'm already biased going into it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I thought, how can you? There was a quote from Louis L'Amour I'll point out real quick, and I can't quote it verbatim right now, but it was historians and people who should know better should not judge people by the canvas of the time they lived in. You can only be judged by the canvas of your time. And
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. I mean, yeah, there's people like Hitler. He killed 6 million people. I'd say he could be judged by just about
Just
any
about
general.
any. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Right.
unless you don't, there's a lot of you, and I'm not an apologist for Jesse. He wasn't an angel by any means, but I don't think he was a psychotic killer a lot of people painted him to be, and I don't think he was suicidal at all. I mean, I could see how somebody could paint the picture as that, but that wasn't anything like his personality.
It
Um,
is an interesting take in that film, I think. I haven't watched every film ever made about Jesse James, but one thing that strikes me as interesting about that one is this sort of like moody,
Oh,
dark,
it's
brooding
very
part to
gloomy.
him, but then
Yeah.
also the particularly that when it comes to the point of his assassination, this kind of inference that he left himself open to it
Because he
yeah,
knew that
is like
Bob
the
Ford was,
first
yeah.
time anybody's ever tried to portray it that
Yeah.
way, right? And I always thought that was quite interesting. Again, I don't judge that film based on any sort of accuracy. I mean, it's just,
well, see, and that's what I
more the
tell
movie
myself.
making side of it that I
Yeah,
always liked. But
and
it's an
well, it makes
interesting
me.
that they try to do it in a different way. I guess when you've done so many, someone's had so many films done about them, somebody
Yeah,
may be trying
I
to have a
mean,
different take on it, I guess.
Yeah.
they've even had movies like Jesse James meets Frankenstein's daughter, stuff
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
you know. And
What?
I've never even watched that one, so
How did I
I
miss
just know
that?
the title. But yeah, I usually I'm not the type of person to get mad at the story. It's Hollywood. It's meant to entertain. And if
Right.
you're entertaining, that just drives more interest in the topic. And
Yeah.
there's going to be a certain percentage of people who watch the movie and then they think, hey, I'd like to know more about it. And
I
they
don't think
get
that
into
I ever really gave. I mean, I knew the Jesse James story, and it was cops and robbers, outlaw, cowboy. In my mind, that it was over in the corner as, oh, he was like Billy the Kid. He was. I don't think I ever really considered Jesse James until I actually watched that movie, and then I was like, oh, wait, there's something here, and then of course I ran across your book, and I was like, oh man, this is interesting. All right, so I'm gonna get us back on track. um Touch on, don't, you can talk about whatever you want, but touch on Williamsburg a little bit, maybe just like the tangential stuff about how he would possibly hide out there, or things like that. But I don't want to get too much into the Templar kind of coded connection there, because we still got to deal with this fake death and whatnot, and then we'll move on down the line.
Okay.
So,
Well, there were a lot of places all over the country the James gang were said to have been. Kentucky, Virginia, Georgia, California. They'd hit a train or a bank in Kentucky, and then a week later they'd hit one in Oklahoma, not Oklahoma, but Texas, Stagecoach in San Antonio, Louisiana, stuff like that. And the way they split up, there's a lot of people. Like there was a guy. One of the gang members, I think it was Dick Liddell, was arrested. They thought that they had Jesse, and it was actually one of the gang members. He was mistaken. The identity was mistaken constantly. The law, and that was one of the reasons he got by with it for so long. Nobody knew what he looked like. You had people describing him as 5'8", and other people like John Newman Edward, who personally knew him, describing him as a tall, finely molded man. And there's stories
That's how
like
Ernie describes me most of the time.
that's a Nephilim blood.
They were so flowery the way they worded things back then. I always enjoy reading it. But anyway, there was his mom, Zerelda, when she said that she sent him off to the bush, when he joined Quantrell's Raiders. And when he finally came back after several months, she almost didn't recognize him. She said the brush life was good for him, obviously, because he was tall and filled out, and he looked like he was taller than most men. She was 6 foot tall, and he was taller than her when he came back, which that's his mother's account. Now, there's some people who could say, oh, she was making that up to throw people off his trail, because now they're looking for a tall guy. But there's too many instances of people describing him as a tall man, over 6 foot tall.
And so in Williamsburg, is that just?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're fine. That just one of the possibilities, or are there any like?
It wouldn't shock me, but I don't have any proof.
Okay. And the proof or the evidence kind of comes later with the template and the maps and things like that.
With like his father-in-law, Thomas Hudson Barron, he was from Virginia. He went from Virginia to Kentucky and then to Arkansas. They called it the Upper Red River. It was in what's today Miller County, Arkansas, before he came down into Texas. That was his father-in-law. So I know the Barons came from Maryland, then they moved to Virginia, and then came out west. And a lot of the other families came from Virginia. So the Virginia is, their origins and the families. And if you look at genealogy, or if you've ever done a lot of genealogy, back then when people would move, it was whole groups, cousins, family.
And everybody came from Virginia or Massachusetts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You follow it far enough back, and everybody either came from Massachusetts or they came from, Jamestown or Plymouth. Okay. So, all right, let's get into the fake death. We already talked about, Jesse James was too tall to be standing on a damn stool. And that, I think you've talked about before, you think that might have been a story put forward to explain kind of the angle at which he was shot, because he was kind of shot up and at the back of his head. Now, so let me see how we want to get into this, because
you want me to frame the historically accepted version of his death?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So like you'd already set that up. Bob and Charlie Ford had joined. It was after the Northfield, Minnesota bank failure. Half the gang was dead or in prison. Jesse had to rebuild another gang, and in comes the Ford brothers. So Bob and Charlie Ford, and this is a historical version, Bob and Charlie Ford had made a deal with Governor Crittenden, Thomas T. Crittenden, who, by the way, was one of Jesse's cousins. So the governor had a price on Jesse's head. Bob and Charlie Ford wanted to collect that, and the way the story goes, they thought they'd get the money they'd have a ton of money, and they'd have fame for being the guy who killed Jesse James, the most famous outlaw in America.
Let me stop you right there, because it wasn't until this second time around listening to you on Richard Serrett's podcast that I caught this piece of information, and that was that one, the Fords were, I mean, I knew they joined the gang, but I didn't know if they were just some in the past. I didn't know if they were just some transient kind of cowboys that proved themselves tough and ended up in the gang. But they knew each other before that. And then this judge that they were in cahoots with was a cousin.
Like the sheriff of Clay County was Jesse's cousin.
So my question is, do you think it's possible, and we'll get into the other like kind of subterfuge and how much this kind of fake death was actually really set up and kind of genius. Before we get there though, do you think, I think I listened to you talk about it, and you kind of intimated that what you just said, that these guys had this plan and it was kind of messed up that they were cousins and they're going to take him out and then go get the reward. Do you think it's possible at all though that they were that this whole thing could have been played out from the beginning, him putting the warrant out, or them to go, putting them undercover in his gang?
Could have been. I mean, I don't rule out anything after all the stuff we've been through and learned over the last 25 plus years. I really don't discount most things.
I almost think, when I was listening to you the second time around, it almost feels like the deeper conspiracy would be the easier of the two options, because you've got this judge, you know what I mean? If they all knew about it, it wouldn't have been, at that time, they get this body who looks like Jesse, and that's Height. What's his name again?
Wood Height.
Wood Height is in and I don't want to steal your story, but I get excited talking about this.
No worries.
Wood Height is part of the gang, and he ends up in a love triangle there in Missouri with Bob Ford's
Martha Bolton.
Bob Ford's sister, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Her name was Martha Bolton.
This is another reason that I find it strange that it would just be that like there would be this faction within the gang, the Fords and this uncle or cousin judge over on this side, and then the James faction over here, and they don't know that one is trying to take them out, when another one of Jesse's gang, his cousin, is in a love triangle with the Ford sister, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, they're not just acquaintances who do some crimes together, and they're intimately like acquainted. I mean, their whole families are intimately acquainted. And so, what's the Height guy's name again?
Wood
Height. Wood Height is in this love triangle. She's married, correct?
Well, her husband was dead. She was a widow.
Was dead, and she was hooking up with
her farmhand Jim Gibson
and Wood Height. Okay, yep. So the sister of Bob Ford, Jesse's supposed assassin, his sister is hooking up with some farmhand. We don't, whatever. And Jesse James's cousin. Okay. Yeah. And then those guys at some point find out about one another, get in a fight, and Wood Height is killed.
Yep.
Correct?
Yeah.
And shot in a similar place, right? Back of the head.
Yeah.
Right.
And
that was, he looks like Jesse.
Yes. Yeah. They said they bore a striking resemblance.
Okay. And this is in the
well, it also makes sense when you think about that first attempt. Again, I'd never heard about that. But when you think about, well, hey, why don't we just ride into town and say we killed him and collect the reward money? I mean, if I was Jesse James, I'd say, just go tell him that you shot me and get the money.
And then that doesn't work. So later on, they go, okay, we're going to need some more
It's got to be more
moving
complicated.
parts in place. We're going to need a guy who's going to be able to say, hey, I put these guys undercover in his gang. Well, it turns out they're all very well acquainted. One's a cousin of Jesse. The sister of Bob Ford is banging Jesse's cousin, who gets shot in the back of the head. Oh, man, we ended up with a guy who looks like Jesse dead with a bullet hole in the back of his head in the middle of winter in Missouri. Not hard to keep a body cold, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it would complicate your idea, I think, in it being a plot if the body appeared as a convenience. Because if this dispute led to the dead body,
Now,
then it's like, oh wow, we could do something with this, but that's very different than the judge and the governor being in on it as relatives saying, I think we should set this thing up.
Yeah, but only if they set that up. They had a good period between Woodhite dying and Jesse's supposed death. So they get this body, it's cold, you keep them on ice, and then you go, hey, we got a dead Jesse. Let's get this thing worked out. And then how long is it in between Woodhite's death and Jesse's death?
It was a couple of months at most.
Got a couple of months to set this thing up. So you go, my cousin's dead. That's sad. But hey, Bob, you do me a solid, since your harlot of a sister done got my cousin shot in the back of the head. You want to do me a solid and go talk to your uncle? That's
a literal silver lining.
Yeah. Well, some people say it was a couple of months. Others say it was early March when he was killed, which is still cold. The ground was frozen. They couldn't bury him, so they just covered him with brush and rocks, and that was that. They to keep the animals from gnawing on him. So it was 1 to 2 months before Jesse allegedly died, before the official assassination. And your point, like what you're saying, if it was a fight because of the love triangle, that could discount. There's several options. I mean, that could discount the idea that it was a plot, or maybe they would
make lemonade out of lemons.
It could have been, yeah, exactly. Okay, he's dead. He'd help me out, and whether he would or not. We've been doing
this thing a long time. I'm tired. It's time
to
retire.
There's another point. The side that backs up the plot, there were rumors. Woodhite thought of himself as a ladies' man. That was well known. There were rumors, and they hinted at it slightly in the coward. What was that?
The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. The absurdly long title.
Yeah, it is. They hinted at that slightly. If you didn't know anything about the rumor, you wouldn't think anything of it. Martha Bolton had a daughter. She was supposedly 12 years old, and there were rumors that Wood had molested her, which would back up. And the thing they did, there was an old timer, and he of course, it's not proof, but it did support the theory. The old timer said that back then, when somebody did something horrible like that, they would kill them what would they do? They would shoot them and then put a skunk in the coffin when they buried them, so that the skunk would gnaw at them, and they would bury them face down, facing hell. So that's how they would bury people like that, according to this old timer. Now, the funny thing is, in 1995, when they exhumed the alleged grave of Jesse James, the body they dug up was face down. And I thought, this is kind of strange. That's a little interesting. Just another interesting part of the story that you can't really say why he was put face down. Oh, and he was anatomically correct, which didn't line up with the history of the whole story. Jesse James was originally buried at the James farm so the mother could watch over the grave. Right. Then in 1909, on a rainy day, he was buried in a metal coffin. On a rainy day, they're taking him to town to bury him because she was getting old. That's how the story goes. Zerelda was getting old. She couldn't keep up, and she decided to go ahead and move the body on a rainy day to Mount Olivet Cemetery in Kearney. and they reburied him. On the way there, the bottom of the casket was supposedly fell out, and they put everything back. And I thought, I guarantee they didn't put everything back anatomically correct.
Right.
I mean, they're not forensic scientists. I mean, toe bones, all that. So,
so this was an undisturbed grave when it was, a couple hundred years later when it gets dug up. But this is a.
And then they buried him. So why would the family bury him face down? Their own brother.
Well, yeah, they dug him up. Even if they had originally done him dirty and buried him face down because he was a dead outlaw, when they dug him up and he fell out of the bottom of it, why would they put him back in the coffin face down?
And they loved him, killed him when he was allegedly assassinated. Why would they bury their son face down and anatomically correct after the bones had fell out the bottom of the coffin? Oh, and when they exhumed it, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, when they exhumed the grave, there were 2 bodies found in the grave, and one was a male, one was a female. They found female clothes and male clothes and bones. And also, the coffin didn't match the description of the metal coffin. When that coffin was ruined, they didn't put it back in that coffin. I made a mistake on that part when I was telling you. They got another coffin and put him in that. But it was supposedly a metal coffin that they reburied him in. And it wasn't a metal coffin that got exhumed. And there's more to that, but I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Okay. So basically, what we got here is we got the official story. Jesse James shot in the back of the head. They bury him. Jesse James is gone. Or the possibility, what I believe is 100% true, and you'll show how true it is, that they have this body possibly, and this is what when you were talking, I had this thought again. I was re-listening to one of your podcasts, and what's interesting to me is you had talked about during the James gang, their robbing career. One of the things that they supposedly had done is they kind of got into this racket with ex-Confederate gold miners out west who would get a bunch of gold and then they'd ship it on a stagecoach further east, and they'd hire the James gang to knock off the stagecoach. Their money was insured, so they get the insurance money, and then the James gang would return them the money. Well, that
they doubled their money.
What are you being attacked by over there?
Sorry, I lost my my thing. So that it could possibly be that they took a page out of those gold miners' book. You already see them try to send somebody into town and say they killed Jesse to get the reward money. You don't think that Jesse was just going to let them do that and then run off with the reward money? No, that was coming back to the gang too. Well, that didn't work. Somebody ended up with that money. Now, if the Fords are in cahoots with Jesse to fake this death, that goes back into the kitty too at some point. So I remember just making that connection between what they had helped these guys out west do when they were in the thick of it, and then what they could have, possibly done pretty much the same thing, just replace Jesse with gold, and it's the same kind of scam. Okay.
Well, I don't want to derail further either, but one thought I've been having when $60,000 you mentioned in that one
millions
bank robbery is a heck of a lot of money at that time. Now, if you continue robbing banks and trains and stagecoaches, and then you try to fake your death and get the reward money and any number of these things that would have happened, what happens what do you do with all that money at that time if you're just still sort of wandering around like a normal guy? What do you do with it? What's the point? And what is the point? What is the point of amassing it if you're not?
You're gonna find out.
One day you're Jesse James, but the next day you pop up in San Francisco and you buy several blocks of a city and start developing something. I mean, what happens with all of that? And maybe you're going to get to that, but that's just one thing I'm thinking. Why in the world would you do that and have all that money? What are you going to do with it?
Exactly. And real quick, just to make a quick comparison, $60,000 back then, that's 3,000 $20 gold pieces. Each $20 gold piece is roughly 1 ounce. An ounce of gold spot price today is $3,300, right around 3,300. That would, if it's 3,300 times 3,000 gold pieces, that was 9.9 million or 9.5 million. It's over $9 million. So if a crew of robbers hit a bank today and got away with 9 million, they're pretty much set for life. And that was just one bank.
And they're the FBI's #1 most wanted in America,
Yeah,
barring we've got any terrorists to go after. I was
these
wondering, have you
guys-
looked in, being that Silver Spoons guy was a Yankee
Yeah.
dude, have you looked at all into his efforts and possibly putting money? I mean, because that's $9.9 million stolen from that guy. That would be a pretty personal, if some guy from the opposition army, after the war's over, steals from you. Have you ever looked much into to see if he was, in cahoots with I used cahoots twice in one podcast. I'm gonna have to stop.
Use cahoots a lot.
So have you ever found any connections between that general and like the Pinkertons or the Rockefellers, anybody that kind of were after Jesse for a while? Because I feel like he would have,
Well, Silver Spoon's butler was one of the board members of the Northfield Bank in Minnesota, and he was there was records I'd found that he would go to, like, he would take a vacation at times to see his friend, one of the Rockefellers. There you go. The big Rockefeller guy. I can't remember his first name, but anyway, I always think of it as Rockefeller. Well, he would go to Florida and they would play golf. And another odd thing, and I don't want to get off on that. I mean, it's really not.
It's cool, man. It's all in our world. So
don't get Ernie too excited.
Frank James was a big fan of golf, which shocked me later in life. It just shocked me. I thought, that's weird. You go from robbing banks and trains out in the old West, and now he's a golfer. I just thought
that's why I find that this is my absolute favorite period of American history. Is
anything went
from the end of the Civil War to the 1920s, like from the end of the Civil War through the Industrial Revolution. You had those same guys who were literally shooting people, on Main Street, and it was allowed if the guy called you a cheater or something. You know what I mean? Living up to you had Wyatt Earp, who literally fought in the gunfight at the OK Corral and then lived long enough to sit on set of the movie being made about the gunfight of the OK Corral. Do you know who was a grip on that movie too?
John Wayne.
That's how. Isn't that wild, dude? He's hung out with Wyatt Earp. I mean,
I hate to go ahead, finish your.
I was just gonna say the juxtaposition of going from being a Wild West lawman to sitting in a director's chair watching that movie be made about you is just it's such a short period of time and such a massive change in the country. It's just really huge. Hard to wrap your head around.
Well, this is not quite a diversion, but I'll bring it back to Virginia for a moment. You know the significance of Butler and where we are right now. Well, where Ernie and I are right now. And this is probably going to get Ernie excited and send him down a rabbit hole for the next couple of days. But Butler was in charge of the Union expedition in Bermuda Hundred, which is now Chester.
Oh, wow. It's like
so when they during the siege of Petersburg, there was an attempt to make a diversionary attack around the city on the other side of the Appomattox in the James in Chester. And Butler was responsible for that group of forces that was trying to go north of the city in the Appomattox in what is now Chesterfield County. And they ended up calling him Bottleneck Butler here for a while because he got to a certain point. The Confederates built a new line of defenses between the two rivers and stopped him, and he just sat there on the peninsula between the James and the Appomattox for most of the siege of Petersburg. So he was actually literally, I can walk out of the back of the house and look across the river, and that's where he was. But then he was also, if you've ever seen Glory, there's the Union general with the colored troops when they raid the plantation, where he literally has
and
guys
he's
pulling the spoons out of the house.
Yeah.
He was responsible for the attack on Fort Fisher in that film as well. So there's a film connection, but Butler was literally right here in our backyard.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I forgot, Daniel. I forgot you worked at Pamplin Park and you did like some reenactment and stuff, right?
Well, we don't like to say reenactment in the museum world as costumed interpreters, but yes, I was at Petersburg National Battlefield and then Pamplin Park. But specifically they call it the Bermuda 100 campaign, and this is strange too because you're talking about golf. I found that it was called the Bermuda 100 golf course. And I played golf there one time and literally was driving down the cart path, and there were Civil War bullets exposed on the top of the cart path all over the place. You could just pick them up everywhere. Because the Union Army, when they got stuck with Butler, they literally just camped there for several months. And their stuff was just still laying around all over the place out there. So there's a connection to golf as well. Here we
go.
How about that with some through lines?
Yeah, I'm looking at it on a map. Some red yarn and a whiteboard, man. Okay.
Yeah. Trust me. When I'm doing the research, any research I'm doing, my whole bedroom, my desk is here. I'll line the walls and just sit here, and it's like you're looking at maps, you're looking at the connections. It's like an FBI mob movie where you're connecting the dots.
I don't have any books to write, and I've got notes like that all over the place. It looks like the Unabomber making a manifesto over some information that nobody's cared about for a long, long time. But all right, so here we go. So Jesse James is either dead and in the ground, killed by the coward Bob Ford, or he fakes his death. Then what happens? And how does that tie into your family? I think the best way to transition into your family is just the fact that we do know that Jesse James used an alias at one point. That was, what was that alias's name?
He used several. There was one of the historically famous aliases they claimed was Tom Howard. I actually think that was Wood Height, not Jesse. But the alias he went under here in Texas was James Lafayette Courtney.
And who was your great grandfather?
James Lafayette Courtney.
There we go.
But James L. Courtney was actually the real James L. Courtney was a cousin of Jesse's from Missouri, and he kind of fell off the map after I don't know what happened. We found out later, but there was a long period of time, decades, where you couldn't find him on census records or anything. So he was the real James L. Courtney. His family had already changed their name from Haun to Courtney. It was Haun.
Haun. And they changed because they were ex-Confederates, and a lot of Confederates and guerrillas changed their name.
They were imprisoned on charges during the war for things like stealing cattle and driving them to help feed Confederate forces or guerrilla forces, things like that, aiding guerrillas, aiding and abetting, basically. But they'd throw them in the prison in Illinois, Mount Grace. I can't pronounce that. Anyway, it was a prison in Illinois. And that's not really important other than they were cousins and they were all on the same side. The real J.L. Courtney was described as the real J.L. Courtney was a Yankee bugler, and he was described as having black hair, and his description didn't match Jesse's at all.
Okay.
Which is another, so.
But your great grandfather, who went by the name, he's posing as the real J.L. Courtney, doesn't match the description of the historic J.L. Courtney, the Union bugler, who the real J.L. Courtney falls off the face of the map, And sooner or later, J.L. Courtney pops back up and he's living in Texas. Now, what I found crazy interesting about J.L. Courtney, still in the 1800s times, is, and I don't think I heard it on this last interview with Sarah, but I believe I read it in your book. Didn't he buy? Okay, so J.L. Courtney, your great grandfather or great great grandfather?
Great, great.
Great great grandfather lived on a piece of land in Texas, in Blevins, Texas.
Blevins, Texas.
Now, I think I thought I remembered he bought that land off of a man who had like the largest ranch, off his father-in-law, who had the largest.
And his father-in-law had being part. You know, he had leagues of land. I mean, several. When he would get Mexican land grants, and he would spell his name different. Thomas Hudson Barron, Thomas H. Barron. He got land much more than he was supposed to, but he would just go under a different name to the Spanish, and they would, he'd say the vow, the oath he'd say the oath to the Spanish and the Catholic Church. You had to be Catholic, and you had to say an oath to Mexico. Right. But anyway, he would give them the oath, and then he would sign his name in different ways: T.H. Barron, T. Barron, all these different names or variations.
So he had one of the biggest. He was one of the biggest landowners.
When he died, in 1874, he was listed in the Waco newspapers as one of the wealthiest men in that area. They described him as an old Indian fighter, early day Texas Ranger, and one of the wealthiest men in the area. He owned a steam mill in Waco, which he'd had trouble during Reconstruction with the Union forces because he had used the steam mill and the cotton gin to supply material for clothing for the Confederates.
Okay, so that's who James L. Courtney buys this piece of land from. Now, one of the interesting pieces was, didn't the guy that the father-in-law that he bought the land from, didn't he have a racehorse that was named Jesse James?
That was a different guy.
Oh, okay.
It was another wealthy rancher in Texas that had the racehorse.
Okay. Okay, so
that was the guys who owned the King Ranch in South Texas.
Okay, so I was wrong on that. But when you look at, you find where a bunch of Contral's raiders end up, you're able to kind of pinpoint where they ended up afterwards, after they changed their names and they all kind of moved out to Texas. And I think I remember reading in your book that it was almost like they had set up a perimeter encircling James L. Courtney. So this guy, James L. Courtney, buys this piece of land, sets up his home there, and then just so happens that all these guys who used to fight with Jesse, they all end up almost kind of in a circle around where making their homesteads in like a perimeter almost around where James L. Courtney ended up.
All the Masons in the area, even today. One of them recently passed away, Jimmy Thornton. He was a good guy. But anyway, he told us a lot about Jesse as a Mason. And the lodge he went to, according to him, Mr. Thornton, all the Masons in that area all knew that everybody in that area knew about Quantrill's guerrillas and James L. Courtney actually being Jesse James. He said it was something they didn't talk about. They all knew it.
They all knew it. And
he said when they got together at their lodge meetings, that was a private place where they could talk. They could say anything they wanted, And
this, I remember hearing you talk about this, and it seems so crazy that could be pulled off, that somebody could hide just under a different name and still look like the guy who was like the FBI. I mean, essentially the FBI's most wanted man, right? But then you just fast forward a little bit into history, and you get to Bonnie and Clyde, and it was no different where they were from. I mean, the whole town knew when they were coming to visit his mom. They knew when they were leaving. The whole town was able to, which is a really funny connection because some of those same Texas Rangers are involved in that. But like,
well, and it's funny that you mentioned Bonnie.
they
Bonnie
had phones and stuff then,
well,
and
Bonnie,
and they still weren't
Bonnie's
able
maternal,
to. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Bonnie's maternal grandfather, his
Yeah.
last name was Kraus or Krause. It was Krause. He had his farm was next door to Jesse's, James L. Courtney in Blevins, Texas. I don't know if there's a
Crazy.
connection or if it's just a weird coincidence, but
But I think
when
it
we
does
found that
speak.
out, it was
Yeah,
wild.
I think it just speaks to the absolute proof and possibility that yeah, this stuff is able to be kept secret in small southern towns with a huge distrust of the federal
Yeah.
government because of Reconstruction. Of course they're going to protect one of their own.
Well,
You
and
know, a lot
when your father-in-law is a former Texas Ranger and
and
one
the
of the
legacy,
wealthiest men in the area, and all that went along with that,
and you're
what
nestled
better
right in the
person
middle
to
of his
yeah, nobody's and
empire.
knowing and like you said, knowing how small towns are, people aren't going to question the guy. You don't want to rock the boat. They've
Yeah.
got enough power to crush you. So
Yeah.
and not to mention the fact that Jesse James himself, he wouldn't need help. He and a couple of his guerrillas could have,
Yeah.
they could have taken care of a lot of problems.
Okay. So let's all right. So we've moved past Jesse died and got buried in the ground. All right. He's James L. Courtney. Now
Yeah.
I want you to talk about because your mother was the one who started this kind of journey for you guys. It had
He
always
started
been
the whole
told to
thing. Yeah.
her, like her whole life, like people knew that Jesse
Yep.
James was James L. Courtney. And that wasn't something like some of the people in town knew, but certainly the family had always been told. It had been kind of passed down. You know, Grandpa James was Jesse,
Yeah.
and obviously after his death and her father's death, she gets passed down some pretty interesting. Oh no, I think I don't know why I'm telling your story. You can tell it much better. But yeah, just yeah. So the theory is that your great grandfather James L. Courtney is Jesse James. Now, just tell us how your mother, rest her
Okay.
soul, and you kind of started putting these pieces together and the evidence that you guys found, and then that whole crazy part of you guys' life, because it gets gnarly.
Yeah. Well, mom, like you said, mom grew up all her life. Every family get together, holidays, birthdays, whatever. The family gets together, and they had large families. They would get together and start. Old people start talking, different people, and they'd all talk about Jesse James. It was like it was a fact, like a known thing. And the kids were interested, but the old timers already knew the story, and it was like, yeah.
Old
But
hat.
they were more interested in the stories of the treasure he'd buried.
Right.
But that's a different anyway. So mom grew up hearing the stories that Jesse was her great grandfather. And, she had no reason to disbelieve or doubt what her family was telling her. Then she gets older, goes to junior high school, history books, TV shows, movies. They'd all mention Bob Ford shooting Jesse in the back of the head. And she thought, okay, something's wrong. According to my family, he didn't die. Everybody else is claiming he did die. And she wanted to know the truth. She ended up getting married right out of high school, had me, my brother, sister. Fast forward, we finally were in college, and she finally had time to research that mystery. So while we're in college, she's digging here and there. I remember we'd go to, I commuted down into Austin, and she would say, anytime you go by the library, just look up these names for me, or try to do and I didn't really have time, but I would help her as much as I could. And After college, I got married. A year and 3 weeks later, I left her and came back home. And I thought, well, I started making rustic furniture. I was my own boss, and I thought, okay, I've got time to help Mom. So we started going down to the state archives and went from there. At the state archives is where we ran into one of our first, really, for us at the time, it was very weird and creepy. We're in the state archives. The librarian was David Baskins. He's dead now, but anyway, he real nice guy. He told us when we'd go in to make sure you sign in, make sure every time we went in, and we'd go in 2 or 3 times a week. He's like, make sure you sign in. That was like the thing he said right when you walked in the door. So one day we go in, and this was after about 7 or 8 months of research, and we were going through everything: census records, death, birth certificates, all of that. Researching not only Jesse, but anybody mentioned in his day book, any name that tied in with him in any way. We researched as much as we could, did their genealogy and everybody else's. So one day we go in, and David Baskins walks up and he quietly said, "Don't sign in. Don't sign in." And Mom said, "Why?" And he said, "They're watching." And he turned around and walked off. And I looked at Mom like, what the hell? Is he on something? It's down in Austin near UT. A lot of people are on stuff, so who knows? Anyway, so he walked away, and it was odd. So we go to the table, we start researching, and I noticed there was an old man. Well, not old. He was in his 60s, an older gentleman and a younger guy together at a table, and they were staring at us. They just watched us. When we got up and left, they got up and left. We walked out to the truck. They walked right by us. And I thought, okay, maybe that's just a coincidence. David and his weird little thing just threw me off and made me a little paranoid. So the next time we show up a few days later, those same 2 guys are staring at us. They came up to the table and introduced themselves. One was Jay Harrison, a former Dallas police officer, went into great detail telling me how he was first cousins with then Governor Bush and later President Bush. But anyway, he was supposedly first cousins with Bush. He was right down 2 blocks away from JFK when he was assassinated and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, okay, that's a great story. I'm trying to research. So it's interesting. But my plate was full. So he kind of laughed. And the younger guy, I said, "In your name?" And he said, "My name's Jeff Adams. I'm a house painter." That's all he said. So we go on, we're talking, and they were probing, asking us questions. And then, Mom looked at them like, why are you doing? Why are you so interested in this? And we had to leave. They made us feel uncomfortable, one of those gut feeling type things. So we left. Next time we came back, they were there again, walked up, introduced themselves again a second time. Jay Harrison was the same guy he said he was. But Jeff Adams, the younger guy, tells us, "Well, I'm not a house painter. I'm a researcher for the Texas State Bar." And I thought, that's odd. Why would you lie about that? He handed me his business card. I checked it out online later. His picture was on the Texas State Bar site. Jay Harrison, the older man, told us, "You can mention who your grandfather was. You can prove that, but don't mention any names that tie in with the Texas power structure." And I remember I was thinking, and Mom and I we were so naive. We didn't know anything. I mean, we just knew what, it was like stepping in. That was our entry, our doorway into a completely different and very strange world. Mom said, "Well, who's the Texas power structure?" And he smirked and said, "You'll find out." And then he wanted us to follow him to the Texas State Cemetery right down the street and show us some stuff. Mom was like, "I'm not following you anywhere. I don't know you, and we're not going anywhere like a cemetery with you." So a couple tried this. He kept asking us several visits later. We were like, fine. Our curiosity was piqued, and we were laughing. If we die, leave a note to Dad or something. But we went. He walked us through the cemetery. There was an open grave he walked up to, waiting for a burial. And I thought, why are we standing next to a hole in the ground in a damn cemetery? And even though it's in the middle of Austin, it's a big cemetery, and you know how cemetery it's like nobody's around. You're in the middle of a city, but you're completely alone at the same time. Well, he, he, nothing happened. He just walked us to a couple of other big names in Texas history, and he would ask weird questions like, "Was he gay?" And mom got fed up with it and said, "I don't know. You seem to know everything. You tell us." And he acted offended, and that was the end of it. Well, he kept warning us and watching us. The whole thing was really strange. But he warned us again the last time we talked to him. Never mention any names at the time of the Texas power structure. Now, the names we were researching, we didn't realize at the time, was Bedichek, Dobie, and Webb. They were famous in Austin and in Texas. J. Frank Dobie was an author. Walter Prescott Webb. That was another thing he told us. I got to and there's so many damn rabbit holes. I could go on for days about a lot of this stuff. So J. Frank Dobie, the author, Walter Prescott Webb, and Bedichek, Roy Bedichek. Roy Bedichek's father, James Madison Bedichek, rode with Quantrell's guerrillas. That's what was scaring somebody in the Texas power structure. They didn't. Our theory was there's somebody with power, probably a politician, who doesn't want their name connected with that.
They don't want their genealogy in modern day to go back to the bloodiest.
I mean, you know how politics are. If somebody finds out that somebody's fifth great grandfather was on a slave ship, it ruins their career. They get canceled, and that's that. So I thought, okay, maybe it's threatening somebody. They don't want it known. But I told Mom, I said, if it falls in with if we need it, if it's a key piece of evidence, I don't care. I'll take the risk. And it never came to that. I don't know what would have happened. Which, the story gets deeper. It keeps going.
The house painter piece is interesting. That's the old I hear you paint houses thing, which is one of the mafia codes for you're a hitman.
Yeah, that's Bob.
When I saw the movie, when that movie came out about
Kill the Irishman, right?
Yeah. Oh. When I was sitting right here on my computer watching Kill the Irishman, and he goes, "I hear you're a house painter." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I thought, "Oh my God!" It still gives me goosebumps.
Well, that's just crazy. They were obviously maybe not. Well,
I don't know if
the fact that they mentioned the Bushes, I mean that in
put up
my conspiratorial mind, that points directly towards CIA involvement, at least some sort of intelligence, even if it's at the state level. They were there.
Well, then we get contacted later. It was about a month or two later. We were contacted. Mom was contacted by Wagner Carr. He was a former attorney general for the state of Texas, and he was on the Warren Commission investigating the assassination of JFK, which Jay Harrison was telling us in great detail everything he knew about the assassination of JFK. I know Bush Sr. was there when it happened. His cousin, and he's dead now, Jay. I don't know if I'm not even going to say that. There was just rumors about the type of cop he was. Right. That's I've heard. It's like just that kind of stuff. There's nothing you can really verify as to whether he was or not crooked or not. But so I just said it anyway. So Wagner Carr contacts us, and at first he was arguing with my mom. I thought, my God, attorney general for the state of Texas is on the phone. We're just country people. We didn't really think, we never thought highly of ourselves. It was just normal, average people. And then you've got the attorney general for the state of Texas, weird guys giving you veiled threats and warnings. The attorney general for the state of Texas calling you. He's arguing with your mom on the phone about who Jesse James was. After they argued several times, he believed her. She showed him all the proof she had, and he was a believer. So as soon as he believed it, he had his driver come out and show us 3 locations where large treasure caches were recovered, and the recovery was overseen by the Texas Rangers. And that's coming from the Attorney General of the state of Texas, former Attorney General. And I thought, oh, this it was blowing our minds. One of the treasures was 12 miles down the road from us. And I told Mom it was recovered in the late 80s. And I said, that was around the time when we could have really used the money. If I would have owned in gold, I mean, just a quart jar full of gold could have fixed all our problems. But anyway, back to the gold, and I hope I'm not getting too far ahead of myself.
No, you're doing good. So you guys are looking. You started off at the library, and then that took us down the Texas Attorney General Road. But collecting that that proof and those clues, some of that is just too incredible to skip over, like the photographs. And then I don't know where we are in the timeline, but you contacting these facial recognition and like forensic people and stuff like that. We can't skip over that for sure.
Thank you for reminding me. So
you're welcome.
We're doing the research. We had the family photos you just mentioned that were passed down through the family. It was photos. We had his journal and a treasure map, which I'll get to later. But so we had all that. And the first thing Mom did while we were going to the archives, she took the photos to 3 different people. She thought, we all agreed this is the same lady. That's Jesse. And he matched, our great grandfather matches the photo of Jesse, the historically accepted Jesse.
Now, where does the photograph of Zerelda come in? Because I mean, that
came in around the same time. I mean, Mom, we were like, okay, this is Jesse. Does his mother look like? And I remember Mom saying, if Jesse's mom in the book, in the historically accepted photos of Jesse's mother looks like her, that's just going to be wild. Because we were still, there's a lot of doubt. You don't know if you're right or if you're wrong. You're right at that point of discovery where it could be anything. And the history being accepted history, you're raised, seeing the movies, reading it in the history books. You already half believe, oh, my family must have been mistaken, So you go into it with a lot of doubt. And then we see we get the pictures. We compare the pictures of Jesse's mom to, our family photos to theirs, and they all matched. And I was like, oh my God. But we knew it couldn't go on our word. We needed official experts, and so long story short, we took it down to Texas Department of Public Safety. That's our state police, the DPS. So we took it, the headquarters is in Austin. So we took it down to their forensic lab, and the lady, they were kind enough. It was Karen Taylor. She was a famous, she was real well. She'd made a name for herself for forensic school, like, what is that? Facial reconstruction on skulls they'd found. She did David Koresh's and a couple other people. It was real. Anyway, they had their software and all the other techniques they used. They verified that our photos matched the historically accepted photos. Then we went from there to the Austin Police Department Photographic Forensic Lab. They verified it. And then the third place, Visionics out of New Jersey, they were later purchased by a company called Identix. They verified, they all 3 entities verified that our photos matched the historically accepted photos. Same dress, same missing arm, same faces, same everything was the same. Even the scar on Jesse's cheek, he had a scar, which we didn't notice it until they pointed it out. He had a scar on his cheek that they assumed was probably from when he was around 15 and got beat severely by the Union soldiers. So
now what's interesting about Jesse's mom is, well, one, I think there was some pushback with you guys because somebody brought up the tiny piece of controversy that the dresses were different. but the dress was the same. It was the same pattern. All those dresses back then were handmade at home. And so, I mean, the same.
They would point out things, our detractors would point out things like, oh, well, that's not the same collar on that dress. Well, collars were removable a lot of times. And men, like if a man's wearing a collar, they were rubberized collars.
And then there was also, oh, well, this lady is missing this arm, and your great grandma was missing this arm. But then you notice that the buttons were opposite, and that's because you had a negative image, and those things were.
And that's the other thing, and I'm glad you're pointing that out, because like pintypes, daguerreotypes, a lot of old photos, they were reversed. It was just, they came out reversed. And looking at the buttons, women's buttons are on the left side, men's are on the right side. And that was a big indicator as to whether or not the photo was reversed. There's other ways of telling it, but the forensic photographic analysts, I mean, the James Farman Museum is where most of our detractors, it was like a hive, and most of our detractors were connected to it in one way or another. The guy who did their photographic analysis was a watercolor painter down in Florida, George Warfel. He was an artist, and he was a good artist, but and he would use he had a slide rule, and he'd measure facial features, not taking into account lens curvature, just slight distortions here or there. And whereas the professionals take all that into account. I mean, that's their job. They do it every day. So it was really interesting.
So you end up with, all this information, the photographic information. Oh, the other thing that I always thought was cool too, and points to this a lot, is that Zerelda she lives in Missouri. The Jameses are from Missouri. But you guys were able to find where she was traveling, even in her old age. She was traveling down to Texas quite frequently. So those family pictures that you have of a woman with one arm with your grandfather, at least tangentially are accounted for by these trips. That
in fact, when she died, she was on a train heading back, from Texas back home to Missouri. Yeah. And she died in Oklahoma on a train.
So Jesse James's mother, in advanced years, dies on a train on her way back from Texas.
That's right.
Is there much else tying her to Texas, like in the official, like Jesse James's mom's story? Jesse James is dead.
Her daughter, Susan Palmer, she married Alan Palmer. She lived in Texas too. So it was up in North Texas. And some of their cousins had a lot of their relatives, especially the guerrilla relatives, had moved to Texas. In fact, after the and I don't mean to get ahead of myself, but I don't want to jump all over the place. I have a tendency to do that. But like H.H. Craig, who was one of the police commissioners out of Kansas City, who was present at the alleged assassination up in St. Joseph, he took a train, rode up to St. Joe. There was a lot of odd things around him. I thought, I'm curious about H.H. Craig. I'll look into him, see if he was related. He wasn't related directly. He was distantly related, but the funny thing is he's a cop. And when he moved to Texas, the mansion he bought in Texas or built in Texas is still down by the coast. It's still, they give tours of it, I believe. It's got a historical marker or something. Anyway, he bought a mansion and had a whole lot of money. He spent his days running around with the guys at the King Ranch, hunting and doing whatever. Yeah. And I thought that's kind of weird. Most cops don't retire wealthy. So,
yeah, no kidding.
It's just, and that's just food for thought. There's no proof other than he had a lot of money when he left, right? And he left right after that.
So, Daniel, you must have had to go take a pee-pee.
No, I had to go get the baby. She was hollering downstairs.
So what you missed is they took their family photos to the, what were the three entities that you took those family photos to?
Texas Department of Public Safety. It's our state police. The Austin Police Department Photographic Forensic Lab, and Visionics, which at the time they were one of the most reputable facial recognition. They were world-renowned facial recognition experts. They sold software to the military and airports.
And their expert opinion was that the photographs of James L. Courtney and his mother were matches for the historic Jesse James and his mother. Now the only detractors that these guys had is the James Farm and Museum. Now, literally, it's very similar to the Shakespeare question, where everybody in Stratford upon Avon is dead set that Shakespeare is Shakespeare because that's all of their tourism. And these guys, the James Farm and Museum, they were detractors and didn't believe this. They hired a facial recognition expert who was a talented artist, but was a watercolor artist from Florida. And not as credentialed, obviously, at facial recognition as these three separate entities who all said it was a match.
I mean, they're the kind, and going to the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Austin Police Department, and Visionics, the first two, that was their living. Their work stood up in court in major cases, criminal cases. So mom always did that. If you're going to go to an expert, you go to the best you can find. And we lucked out and they accepted to do it. We didn't have to pay them. They just did it. Mom asked them, would you analyze these? And they did it. In fact, there was blowback. The guy at oh God, I wish I could remember his name. He's a friend of mine. God, there's so many people. The guy at the Austin Police Department was fired later because they caused a lot of trouble for him and his job, saying the detractors harassed him, and they kept calling the Austin Police Department and Austin City Council asking why the Austin Police Department was doing
taxpayer dollars.
Exactly. Spending taxpayer dollars instead of doing their job. So nitpicky stuff. They did that to everybody. If there was and I'd heard this in other cases, even the people there was a guy named J. Frank Dalton who was a hoaxer. He claimed to be Jesse James. And the funny thing is he claimed it after the real Jesse died, which I thought was interesting. And J. Frank Dalton, I know for a fact he knew a lot about the treasures. He knew more about the treasures than most people. Nobody else would have known some of the things he knew. So he had involvement. I'm thinking Knights of the Golden Circle, something. But J. Frank Dalton had also claimed to be a senator from New York. He also claimed to be Kit Carson, Kit Dalton, and also a U.S. Marshal. I mean, it was like he was all over the place. He was an old guy, and he made money going around claiming this, and that's how he ate.
Oh, wow.
So,
one of the other interesting things that I read in the book and heard in Dan's talks is that Zerelda, the mother of Jesse James, she died advanced years, in her 90s?
She was old. I don't think she was in her 90s. God, I wish I could remember.
She died. Yeah, she died on a train heading from Texas back to Missouri. The Jameses are from Missouri. They lived in Missouri. That's where the James compound there is, or whatever. And she was making regular trips in her late years down to Texas. And that's documented. And she actually died on a trip heading back. And so that puts it adds some light to those photographs of James L. Courtney, his great great grandfather, and his great 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 grandmother, those photographs that were matched up by 3 separate entities. You know.
Yeah, she was 86. She died in 1911 at the age of 86.
There you go. Okay. So we are, I mean, let me ask you this question. You talked about some creepy phone calls. And I don't know if you want to get into that, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but
no, it doesn't bother me at all. We're not easily traumatized.
Yeah,
but
I can't imagine you would be after all this. And you come from pretty hardy stock.
Growing up where I grew up, it's it was kind of weird. A lot of people here were back then. Now it's very civilized compared to what it used to be. North Liberty Hill, Texas, used to be a little dot on the map, and it was a lot of rough, tough cedar choppers, and they were just tough people. And anyway, so you get used to growing up like that. We didn't have any police in town. The only guy who hung around town was the county constable. And if, like, when I was in high school and we were all there'd be 100 kids on Main Street at midnight or later drinking beer, and the constable would drive up and tell us the cops are on their way, so y'all might want to take the party out to somebody's private place.
Right.
And I thought, that's a cool cop. Later on, I found out other stuff about him. But anyways, it was decent at the time. It was a rough, odd area, and it was kind of lawless. So that's how we grew up. Pretty much my backstory.
So you get
until college.
At what point do you start getting these creepy phone calls? And this is to your mother, right?
Yeah, and phone calls. So like you had said, the detractors had they were starting. A lot of the research Mom was doing when we weren't at the state archives or hitting the road going to courthouses and stuff was online. Genforum.com used to be a real hot spot for a lot of that. And you find a lot of good information. And usually the genealogists are very good at backing up what they're saying, most of them, with verifiable records. So we'd go online, and the forums, they found out Mom was on the forums. So it was like teams of them coming into the forums causing trouble. And they would harass her. And I told Mom, we both noticed real quick, they would ask a question, they'd try to get you with all these different forms. They'd ask the same question a million different ways, trying to get you to slip up and then, see, she messed up. She's obviously a hoaxer. And it didn't happen. Mom was very thorough, very calm. She didn't let them rattle her. And the fact that she didn't get rattled easy ended up escalating the whole thing. Eric James, who's passed away about a year and a half ago, he was involved in sending death threats to my mom. Eric James, and it was about 8 or 9 other people. Well, we started getting death threats, emails, stuff like that. They were threatening to kill me, my sister, and mostly Mom. And that makes you paranoid. It's like, if these people are serious, just keep a gun handy. When you go to bed, keep one within arm's reach. So, and we live out in the country. We live way out in the country. And I remember Mom would get mad, and she said, "I'm in Texas. You've got a right to defend yourself and use deadly force to do so. So if you want to come talk, feel free. Come see me." And
I'm talking to Jesse James's granddaughter, dang it.
So, she said, I told her, don't do that, because you don't know how crazy they might be and how many of them, you just don't know. Yeah. So, and there's a lot of people who might hire professionals for that kind of thing. Anyway, and some of them had the money to do that. Long story short, we had death threats. They were harassing. Around the time they were online sending us death threats, 2 people popped up out of the blue. We'd never met them, didn't know them, defending Mom. One was a guy named Dallas Hunt, and he was from the Hunt oil family in Dallas, Texas. His name is Dallas Hunt.
Wow.
And he told us, my grandfather was advisor to 3 presidents and this and that. And I thought, my God, what made him? And he was like 18 at the time, 17, about to graduate high school. I thought, what makes a kid like that from that kind of world get on Jen Forum to defend mom. It just didn't make sense to me, but I thought, thanks for the help. The other guy who did it, who came on at the same time, and they claimed they didn't know each other. It was just same day, same time, and they both were defending mom in the same manner. It just seemed like the same person with two names. The other guy's name was Matt, and he gave us a different surname at the beginning. Later on, he changed his surname, but he would tell us stuff. And mom told he got to calling mom. He was very informative. I mean, he was full of information, things, secrets that you couldn't have known any other way. Even researching all the names we did, there's no way you could have known to look at this name and know that some name we never heard of. And it was like a key to a big part of the puzzle that would piece several sides of the story together all at once. I thought, how does this guy know this? It's not on records. Until you're told the name, nobody knew to look there. So all of a sudden, this guy's just coming out with all these secrets. He sent us photos that were original photos that they were verified. And he would, they matched our family photos. He would send us copies of them. The originals, he said, they kept in their archives. Mom said, whose archives? He wouldn't say. And I thought, this is weird. At the same time, around the death threats, like when mom would do a book signing, we'd never known many Masons in our life, or we did, but nobody told us they were Masons. They didn't just go around talking about it.
Right.
But at the book signings, men would come up, they'd buy a book, want her autograph, and tell them, I'm a Mason, I'm a Freemason. And it seemed like they were coming out of the woodwork. Then people calling us different Masons, helping. And I thought, this is it's odd, but cool. It's nice to have some help instead of death threats. So I'm trying to keep this short and not talk for hours about the same.
I understand.
They mocked mom. She called the FBI. FBI, that's the other thing. FBI called, an agent called. They don't like their names put out there.
Yeah.
I can tell you his name privately, but I don't want to say it.
No worries.
And he told us that, so I'm keeping my word to him. Anyway, the agent contacted mom. He was usually in a whole different branch of the FBI. He didn't deal with this kind of stuff, but he said he requested to take this case for whatever reason. Maybe, with all the other stuff going on, you're wondering, why would he, it makes you paranoid or suspicious or skeptical of a lot of things. And I think that's part of their goal when people send you death threats, is to get you that paranoid.
Yeah, and get you to just drop the issue
and then you start seeing what, like my uncle said, boogeymen behind every tree. I think it's just human nature. But anyway, the FBI got involved. Mom told the detractors while they were harassing her on Gen 4 that she called the FBI. They mocked it. And a couple of weeks later, the FBI knocked on their door. The guy they had sending the death threats spilled the beans on everybody. Eric James and a lot of the other people who are all connected in one way or another to the James Farmer Museum in Missouri had promised this kid that he was in college, in film school in Boston. They had promised him to help him in his film career if he would do this for him. That was his story to the FBI. So mom said, I forgive him. And she forgave him. She said, that doesn't mean he gets by on the justice part of it. Well, Dallas Hunt, they had also threatened Dallas Hunt. And I thought, that's a stupid family to threaten if you know their background. I mean, they weren't like mafia, but there's stories about powerful families that it's just common. I don't know if they're true or not, but they've got the power to take care of stuff, even if it's not illegal. But Dallas Hunt got mad and he sent a threat back to them. And because of that, they told the FBI when they all got questioned, they told the agent, this is according to the agent, if mom filed charges on them, they were going to file charges on Dallas. And to save her friend and keep the kid from getting in trouble, she didn't file charges. But she did demand that the guy who was sending most of the threats wrote down a confession, and she posted it online for public knowledge.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was that. We've
Dude,
still
Daniel,
got.
I told you this thing goes deep, man. It's
Yeah,
wild, dude.
it gets weird. And like a lot of people, I say this on podcasts, but at first I was very hesitant to talk about that side of things, just because I don't want to come off like a crazy crackpot.
Right. Yeah.
And
I understand.
Yeah, and then after a while, you just get to where you don't give a damn. It's like, if people are going to either believe it or not.
Well, and it's
I'm telling them.
verifiable. You know what I mean? It's all right. So I think we should probably tell a couple of the cool stories, because Daniel had this question: where'd all this gold go?
Oh.
And this is going to be very interesting to you, Daniel. Just the experiences that people had with James L. Courtney, and gold. This is so
all right.
awesome, man.
There's a lot of those stories.
So,
like
in particular, there's the young kid,
George.
Yeah, and just his experience with the shooting of the rock, and then also helping James L. Courtney move.
All right. Well, first of all, there's a lot of stories about Jesse, especially in the family with his gold. I mean, some of my great aunts, when I was a kid, they were old ladies. When they were young women, they'd be in Blevins, all talking, sitting around the front yard on a spring or summer day. And they said, when you're sitting there, you're just fanning your hand on the dirt or whatever. And one of the relatives was fanning her hand in the dirt and saw the edge of the rim of a mason jar. They pulled it out, and it was full of silver coins, stuff like that. He had gold and silver buried in different places under fence posts. So there's a lot of stories of gold. I could go on and on about that.
Yeah.
Now, George Roaming, I met him after Mom's first book. He contacted us. He said he was a 32nd degree Mason, and he lived at the time in El Paso. But when he was a kid, he told us his story. When he was a kid, he grew up about a mile or two from where Jesse's farm was. And he was probably 10 to 12 years old. His first stories, he was younger than that, but he would walk by, they walked all over the place back then. He would walk by, and Jesse's house was right on one of the county road. Now it's a county road. Back then it was just a road. He would walk by Jesse's house, and Jesse'd be sitting on the porch. Jesse was old, but his wife, his second wife third wife, was much younger than him. She was like 35 years younger than him, 35, 40 years younger.
Right, Jesse James.
Yeah, and looking at her photos, she looked like you know how you can look at a person's face and tell there's a lot more to that person, just the look in their eyes. She looked like she was up to no good and having fun at it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what her background story was, because a lot of the side of the family who knew her personally never wanted to talk about it, and they were kind of like the uptight, stick in the mud side of the family. But anyway, George would walk by. Jesse's sitting on the porch with his much younger wife drinking lemonade, and he'd invite George up. And he said his wife would be sitting on Jesse's lap, and that made George blush back at that young age. It reminded me of Opie on what was that, the Andy Griffith Show.
Yeah.
But so he said Jesse would talk to him. He liked him, and he said, I said, well, what'd you think of Jesse? And he said, he scared me. And he kind of talked like he kind of sounded like a little rascal, his voice. Even when he was an old man, he's like, he scared me. And then he said, I said, well, why did he scare you, or how did he scare you? And he said, everything about him was big. He was a big man with a big hat and a big mustache and a big gun. And he said he always had a rifle with an arm's reach on his porch, even at an old age. And I've got a photo of him in a wheelchair with a rifle in one hand and a bottle of beer in the other. And I thought that's a cool photo. But George said, like one of the stories, shooting the rock, he said one day he went up there, and Grandpa told him, take this rock. He said it was about the size of a golf ball, and go out 40 paces and set it on the ground. And George did as he was told. And when George got back, he said, Grandpa, we called him Grandpa, Jesse. Jesse stepped off the porch, and before his foot hit the ground, stepping off the porch, he drew his pistol and shot the rock. And George said, I was already afraid of him. And after he did that, I was scared to death. But, oh, and another thing, there was some boys who found a little, like a tin full of gold coins along the side of the road inside a hole next to a tree. They thought it was an animal hole, and they looked into it, and it was the tin was in there. They pulled the tin can out, and it was full of gold coins. They took it home, and their father told them, "You take that back right now." The dad knew who Jesse was, and he was he was like an old gorilla. So they or his dad, either he was or his dad was. Anyway, they all knew who Jesse was, and they knew you don't take the gold, you don't take his gold. So fast forward to George's big story. When George was in El Paso, he was sick, and this sounds like a typical treasure story. George was sick, and it was probably 6 months before he died. He's in El Paso in a hospital. Mom and I drove out there to see him, and he started talking about Jesse, everything he knew about Jesse. Mom was writing it down and taking notes, and then he said, "There's something that I think belongs to y'all." He said, "When I was about 12 years old, Jesse hired me, swore me to an oath, and hired me to help him move 700 gold bars in a large dray. A dray is like a large wagon, like a cargo wagon. 700 gold bars, each one, according to George, weighed about 15 pounds each." He said it took them all day to load it and move it approximately 20 miles from Jesse's house. He drew a map for us exactly where he buried it. And he said they got there. When they got to the location, there was two other older men. And each old man had a young boy that they'd hired and swore to oaths as well. So he said, we dug the hole. They dug a hole about 8 foot deep, lined it with some timbers like railroad ties on the bottom, and then stacked the gold on the timbers and covered it up. And I said, well, he said, oh, they buried 680 bars. Jesse kept 20 for himself. Just that amount of gold. And I have no reason to there is no reason for George to lie, especially at that old age. He drew us the map. We went out looking for it, and it's under Lake Belton in Belton, Texas. It's under Lake Belton, and it's right on the border. I don't know which side of the border it's on. It's either it's right on the border of Fort Hood, the military reservation. So I told Mom, I said, there's no way in hell I'm looking for that. First of all, if knowing it's under the lake, good luck digging that out without stirring up a bunch of silt. And all those, the lake was built in 1954. The dam was built. So it's probably, since 1954, all those years of silt after floods and this and that. 8 foot down. I don't know how many feet of silt it would be under. If you dig it up, especially with all the environmental issues from silt disturbing the quality of the water, all that kind of stuff, there's no way you could do it in secret without letting the world know. And being that close to a military base, I guarantee you wouldn't get far. You'd be lucky to get started digging.
Yeah.
So we turned around, told George about it. He gritted his teeth and cussed. He was like, damn it. And he told us the rest of his story, everything he knew. The thing about the 680 bars of gold, that alone is more gold than the James gang had ever stolen their entire career. Much more.
Right. And that's a perfect segue into let me just go real quickly into Jesse was a Mason. We know that. And back in the I believe it was the 1850s, before the Civil War, there was an organization that was started, and it was this is confirmable. It's a real thing. It's the Knights of the Golden Circle. Books have been written about it, and and just I hadn't heard the the story about the swearing the kids to an oath until just now, and this really brought the I did some looking into the Knights of the Golden Circle at one point, and what's interesting is so the Knights of the Golden Circle, and we'll probably do an episode if I could find a really good tie-in with Virginia. And I know we had castles that KGC castles in Virginia, but
this story, the whole treasure story, I think the origins of it are or maybe not the origins of it, but the one of the biggest parts of the treasure template starts off in Virginia.
Right.
I mean, the whole thing ties back to Virginia.
So, which could possibly tie back to my Templar research, as far as the beginnings of Virginia and Francis Bacon and the whole deal. But the KGC, just to kind of give some connective tissue between Jesse, Masons, Templars, treasure, is that this KGC was they weren't a branch of Freemasonry, or they may have been, but officially they weren't a branch of Freemasonry. Especially now, they don't claim them. Maybe for PR reasons, maybe not.
Yeah, they definitely don't. I'm a Scottish Rite Freemason.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you if you wanted to talk about any of your experiences there, because that's a super interesting part of our story. Because years ago, when I contacted you, we were going back and forth, and I remember sending you an email saying, "Hey man, do you ever get like nervous about talking about this stuff? I mean, you wrote a book and I was just doing like independent research, and I was like, you're talking about big time Masons and political figures in your state." And then on my side, I'm talking about the Rockefellers. And I was like, I emailed you and I was like, you ever get nervous about these people? Like, and the last email I got from you was, actually, no, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar actually contacted me, and he wrote a really nice blurb for the back of my book, Timothy Hogan. And and in that email you were like, and somebody suggested to me that I might want to join a lodge, and I'm thinking about doing it. And then we lost contact. I think I emailed you one other time, and I know you were super busy at that time with the book.
Yeah, and I was going through so much at that time. It was weird. I was thinking about that the other day. That whole time, from the first book to the third book, and before, actually, from 2015 when my mother dropped dead in front of me till my third book came out, that was the lowest point in my entire life. And I thought, that's weird that I published
all this
3
stuff.
books. Yeah, and I know why I did it. I was keeping my mind off everything.
Yeah.
And right after Mom died, the first book that came out, that I wrote about the treasures, I was never going to talk about that. I remember telling Mom, I said, I don't plan on ever telling anybody because I want to find them.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
And not just that, I thought after I'd done so much research, I just going through all the symbolism and everything that ties in with it, I know you'd have to be almost brain dead to know that there's not something of great power behind it, and it's got a purpose. Why would somebody bury all that gold in all those different places in sacred the patterns, tree of life, and all the other symbolism in it itself just screams there's some kind of secret purpose for this stuff. And I thought, I'm never going to write about it. And then after Mom died, all the death threats, I just thought, you know what, to hell with it, I'm going to write the book. And if I get killed, so what? I'll see Mom. So I just didn't care.
So you end up joining a lodge, and then going through the degrees. And I don't want to tell too much of your story as far as that goes, because I know how, you know.
Yeah.
But and literally that was the last time I talked to you. You joined a lodge, and you all kinds of connections and things like that in there. And you had, I don't think I'm speaking too out of school, that you did have brothers that helped you and were very interested in the research and whatnot. So we could just
Yeah.
leave that portion of it, I guess, at that. Or if there's anything
Okay.
else you want to talk, if you want to talk
Well,
about anything else, feel free. But um
all right.
so but getting back to the KGC, because I find them interesting. They're super connected to buried treasure in the southern United States, and really out in western United States, southern United States. People have found caches of their gold. They found these caches of gold by following these like trees that were split and then bent over and tied back in the 1800s. I mean, it is literally Treasure Island level, you know,
Yeah.
missions
Well, I
where
mean,
they find a heart carved into a rock, and that tells them to go a certain amount of distance, and they find this tree that has been purposefully like disfigured in a certain way, and then they dig down and they find a pistol from the 1800s that's pointing in a certain direction, and
yeah.
they find these caches of gold. And not only that, one of the biggest guys who was out finding this KGC gold, he got to a point where he had gotten good at it, and he had found a couple of them, and then he had done what you did. He had found the templates, and he was able to start predicting a little bit better where these other caches would fall on. And he would, as he got to them, like one by one, some of these properties were newly purchased by
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the Army Corps of Engineers, or
Or
newly,
quarry, some company starting
yeah,
a sand quarry or a rock quarry stuff,
right,
which is the perfect cover for digging up a giant treasure.
right,
Is yeah, we've got all this digging equipment because we're a quarry. And
right.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No, no,
yeah,
no, you're good. You're good. Yeah, yeah. I didn't want to
who's
lose
this guy
much.
you're talking about?
I can't remember his name
Was
now.
it Bob?
It's been years since I read about the KGC. I got obsessed
Okay.
with it, and then realized everything was so obfuscated with the KGC that it was hard to really, unless I dedicated like myself to that one thing, it was going to be hard to really look into it too much more. But what you can find on the surface is absolutely incredible. One, it's proven that they were an organization. They were an organization that was developed and put together very similar to Freemasonry. A lot of the people who were in it were Masons, and,
Yeah.
and essentially their mission supposedly was in the 1850s, before the Civil War and before the Emancipation Proclamation, was that the reason they were called the Knights of the Golden Circle is that they wanted to put together a standing army, basically. And they put these, instead of like Freemasonry lodges, all these different places in the South had what they called castles. So in the KGC, instead of degrees and everything like following this like builder template like it is in the Freemasons, in the KGC, it followed like almost a Knights Templar kind of motif. So you had castles, and you had generals, and you had knights, and whatever. So but the KGC was formed in the 1850s. A guy named George Bickle, who they've
Bickley.
yeah they've made Bickley out to be a huckster and can't get right, kind of.
Yeah. And then
But
came Valendingham.
say what?
Another guy, his last name was, I'm probably mangling the pronunciation, but it was Valendingham.
Okay.
Anyway, he was another part of it. He came after Bickley.
Okay. So it continued on, because
Yeah.
they wanted to, I mean, they were putting together private armies and going down into Mexico, because their entire thing was to secede from the Union, and
Mm-hmm.
then create a slave state permanently, that would include the southern United States, Texas, Mexico, and then the Caribbean islands. And that's what would have been this circle. and it would be that's why it was the Knights of the Golden Circle. The writing was on the wall, and the slaves were going to be freed, and it's almost like these guys were trying to get ahead of it.
It was
Now,
like a circle. Havana, Cuba was supposed to be their capital. They would have owned, if they had achieved their goal, they would have owned most of all of Central America, the southern part of the U.S., Texas, a big chunk of Texas, most of Mexico, Central America, and the northern part of South America. And it would have been, I mean, if it it was an ambitious plan and they never came. I'm glad it never happened. I personally think they were duped. I really do. And I think, I'm not saying Freemasonry as a whole duped them, but I think it was Masons who used them.
I think it was a larger purpose. Me and Daniel go back to my research into Virginia and well, it's not my theory, but one that I subscribe to, and that's that Templars were over here early. Bacon set this place aside and got the ball rolling into this becoming a free country, and I think it was chosen because the Templars, he comes from, you know, the succession from the Templar, those bloodlines down to the Templars, down to the Rosicrucians, down to Bacon, down to the Freemasonry. It's just a line down. And I think that they came over here to create this nation, but also earlier, I think part of the impetus of them coming out here was that I believe that the Templars hid things in North America, and it was kind of their safety deposit box for a long time. And then I think after that, it was necessary to continue these secret societies, people who could hold secrets, and there was a system in place in order to preserve the knowledge of where things were, preserve the knowledge of, really a lot of it I think is just a training ground for how to keep secrets. But what's interesting about the KGC is that all throughout the Civil War, these guys who were KGC pop up in some of the guerrilla factions of the Confederacy. And so even during the Civil War, they were doing guerrilla things to help win the war, but a lot of it was theft, stealing stuff, and hiding it. And not only that, what brings me back to your story about the kids taking the oath, these older dudes taking them out and giving them an oath, is that up to the 60s, it was kind of known that the KGC was still operating in Kentucky, Western Virginia, and into the Carolina, kind of an Appalachian thing. And there were what they called sentinels, and these guys that was like their rank or whatever. And these sentinels, it was their job to basically walk these tracts of land where they had these caches of gold buried. And these are the exact caches.
They claim there's people. I know I've met so many treasure hunters in the last the entire time. When Mom came out with her first book, treasure hunters came out of the woodwork. What's your map look? I'd like to help, all that. And after a while, you meet a few, and I told Mom, I said, treasure hunters remind me of land pirates. I would never turn my back on 99% of the ones I met. I wouldn't turn my back on them. So there's some good ones, but I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no. Feel free, because I'll interrupt everybody.
You're right on the money with what you're saying. There's sentinels that they claim there are sentinels today. I don't.
Yeah. Well, there was
sometimes
one guy.
I also think. Well, I mean, if I were after. These guys get on treasure forums and they talk about it online. I thought, well, first of all, that's your first.
You'd never talk about it.
If you're if you plan on keeping any of it, that's the dumbest thing you could do is talk on a forum about something that you're planning on going after.
So, if I'm not mistaken, I think the guy that I read, the guy who had found some of the KGC treasure in the United States, like up in the Kentucky hills. He had a grandfather. So either he got this information from the guy this story is about, or it was him. But somebody had a grandfather, and this grandfather was known on horseback or on foot to walk this ridge line of like 10 miles, like I don't know, once a week or every day or something like that up in the hills. And that's what he did every single day, the same route. And he always carried a shotgun. Something that's very interesting all throughout the Appalachian hills and the Alleghenies and whatnot is they have found people's heads blown off by shotguns. They find it all the apparently that's a big thing. They find skeletons with the heads blown to bits. Anyway, I don't know if that's where it comes from, but there's a bunch of unsolved, like, remains. Anyway,
like cold cases.
yeah. So these sentinels supposedly that was their job, is to basically just patrol these things. And what they would do is they would take a family member and they would slowly but surely get them to know the route, and then they would, and that was kind of the way that they imparted, okay, now you're KGC. And so this guy, this grandfather walked us, and about the age of 10, he started taking his grandson with him. And his grandfather actually died on one of those walks. And
wow.
And it wasn't until the guy became an adult and found out about the KG. He never heard anything. The grandfather never got to that point. He died of a heart attack on the walk. And so he later on in life, he starts learning about the KGC and goes, oh crap, like I think that I was. And then so he starts really studying and starts studying that tract of land. And then so either it was him or it was somebody that he got that information from, figured out the tract of land, and he found a KGC cache, and then found like 2 other ones, and then kind of got shut down. But my point of all that is that it smacks of that kind of story a little bit with those
like
young kids who took an oath.
Yeah, and that there, there had, the old men wouldn't have just been doing that for fun. Like, oh, this is going to be a fun trick, and you'll carry the trick down unknowingly to your son or whatever. I mean, that just doesn't even make sense. So they had to know, they had to believe, they probably knew there was a treasure there. So when I say, like, my theory is that I think the Masons may have duped KGC members. Maybe it was when you have I mean, that goes back to Templar versus the Vatican. The Vatican papal bulls declaring Masons as evil and of the devil, things like that. And then George Roming told me, he said, oh, yeah, up until the 80s, this is what George said. If a Catholics had an order that he said Knights of Columbus had a standing order that if they could kill a Mason and get by with it, they were forgiven of their sins. And he said, and we do the same thing. That's all he said. And I asked other Masons about it, not a word. And then when I went up to a couple of years ago, I got hired as the director of tourism and economic development up in Northeast Texas for a city in Marshall, Texas. So I'm up there and I, making my rounds, meeting the locals, meeting people. And I met a guy, he invited me to his lodge meeting. I said, oh, are you a Mason? And he said, I'm Knights of Columbus. And his brow furrowed when I asked him if he was a Mason. And he told me some stories before I told him that I was a Mason, and about the fights and troubles they'd had. He didn't mention any killings, but he said, yeah, it's gone up until a few years ago. They'd had troubles with Masons in Louisiana or Texas. And I said, I don't think you would welcome me at your lodge after I tell you this. I'm a Scottish Rite. And he just turned around and walked away. So I thought, that's kind of weird. In Austin, everybody's friendly. I've got friends who are Knights of Columbus. No big deal. But in that part of Texas, more rural areas, it's still like fresh wounds. Wow. So what I was trying to get at is when you have an ongoing war, basically it's like a Cold War that has hot spots here and there throughout history. And it bubbles to the surface. Whatever triggers some kind of trouble, it bubbles to the surface. Killing happened, all kinds of stuff. And then it goes back down. maybe the KGC was just a group. I've tied them back to some. They've called themselves other names like Order of American Knights, Oak. They called themselves Sons of Liberty, a whole bunch of different names. And then there's other groups like the Order of the Red Men.
Right.
I'm not tying the Order of the Red Men in with the KGC. There's multiple groups that could serve a purpose when needed, or just recreate it. You've already got everything you need, just update it, and there you go. So I think, I think KGC.
I think that's the whole point of those compartmentalization is kind of the whole point of those structures. And you know that I mean, I know that from my research, you know that from firsthand. What this symbol means at this degree, it means something different when you get to the next degree. And when you get to the next degree, they go, well, that's what it meant in those degrees. But what it really means is this. And the further you go up, you finally, and it almost seems never ending. Like, you know, I know it goes to, 32 degrees, and then there's a 33rd honorary degree, but then there's separate arms and different routes that you can go. And then they say, even when you go through that, then there's, that the rite of Memphis and the rite of, these black lodges, they called, and things get real weird when you get into that. And so anyway, let's bring this thing home. And
all right.
I know. I know. We might just have to have you back on again, because we're going on 2.5 hours, but
well, we hadn't gotten to Williamsburg yet.
No, we haven't. But go ahead. Tell me about the connections that you guys found. And I don't mean bring it home like hurry up at all. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Let's get to tell me about the connections you guys found as far as maps, templates, that kind of stuff.
With the treasure side of it, Mom did all the Mom and my sister, my late mother, and me and my sister, Teresa and I helped Mom do a lot. A lot of the Jesse research. We were every step of the way. We were there with Mom. Mom spearheaded a lot of things before we got. I could go on about that. I'm trying to stop myself.
You're good, man.
But when it came to the treasure, like when I would have extra time, we had all puzzled over the different codes, like the map that was handed down through the family. There's code that's easy to decipher. It's just the numbers for letters, and sometimes it was reversed. Instead of one being A, one would be Z. And it was just, he would reverse it or do it straightforward. And then there's other code that we don't know what the hell it is or how to break it. We've never found parts of that code on his map, but the map never showed any topographical markers. It was just a geometric design with dotted lines and solid lines and a strange face and the sun setting. And, it's kind of, and then he would mention, like he'd write part out like so much money in silver, so much money in greenbacks, things like that. But what am I getting at? I have my mind. I'm serious. It's like a spider's web of stories, and everything I say or everything you say, either one of us, we can say a word. It's another web. So, but anyway, what was I getting at? The treasure maps.
Yeah, no geographic markers.
Oh, yeah. None of that. But what got me talking about that? Do you remember?
We were just saying, let's bring it to the treasure and you guys' connections and things that you found as far as. Yeah.
That's it. When it came to the treasure side of it, we'd all looked at it. I ran off without explaining myself. I was the one who broke the code on the template and all that. The Tree of Life template, the big one, and the 3 veils, which the small, medium, and large templates are symbolic of the 3 veils of negative existence that goes in hand with the Tree of Life, the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. It's in Christian Kabbalah, occult Kabbalah, and Jewish Kabbalah, the
Jewish
original,
mysticism.
which
Yeah.
I had trying deciphering the entire thing took me down those rabbit holes, and you know, you get to a point sometimes, and it's almost I would listen to I spent years listening to rabbis, Hasidic rabbis giving lectures. You'd find a little clue here because you know it's like I would just listen, soaking up as much as I could, trying to learn as much as I could about Kabbalah without actually denying my faith and becoming, you know, a Jew or joining Judaism.
Well,
I have nothing against any of them, any religion or any of that. I'm just saying, I'm not a cult, and I get away from that. What I'm trying to say is, you get into that stuff, and there's a lot of deep rabbit holes. And they even warn you. A lot of these rabbis who talk about it, they're like, you're not supposed to learn it there's only a certain way you're supposed to learn it, because you could get into something spiritually that you can't come back from, basically.
Well, what's interesting about Kabbalah is that it came after the it came after the temple, after the second temple was torn down. They no longer had a temple, and thus they had nowhere to shed blood to atone for sin. So you literally had a people who part of their religion was to the shedding of blood through sacrifice to atone for sin. So you got an entire religion of people who can't be forgiven of their sins anymore, and they start looking for a processes by which to do that, or to regain some sort of connection with their God. And they start turning back to the Solomon era of Judaism and Babylonian mysticism. And so I felt the same way, because the first thing that I found at William and Mary was a Kabbalistic Tree of Life, that gigantic Tree of Life.
I remember you talking about it.
And that's the one thing that I still hesitate to really go into, because just breaking down one Sephiroth, you know, I can't remember how many
of light. Yeah.
Right. I can't remember how many Sephiroth there are that
Well, there's
points.
10.
Right. There's 10, or there's maybe 11. There's the secret.
Well, the way the traditional Orthodox Jewish rabbis say this is there's 10, not 9, 10, not 11. Now, the way they do it is you can interchange one for the other spot, but just practically, you or me looking at the map, there's 11 spots.
And there's so much within every spot. There's
the one that scared
so much symbolism to be broken down with every spot.
Yeah, you're right. The one that makes me nervous is the abyss, Dayat.
Yeah.
And that's the hidden, the 11th.
Yeah.
A lot of people call it the 11th Sephira, but anyway, that it worries me. And then there's another interesting thing about that, and I'll just say it right now. It's not far from the Bell Witch Cave.
Really?
I mean, it's not like it's miles, but on a geographic scale, on the scale, the scale as a whole, the big picture, it's very close to that area. It's in that area of the Bell Witch Cave.
Wow.
It's
All right,
really cool.
Talk about you find this stuff, and it's all these symbols and symbolism, and it gets overlaid.
Yeah.
But go ahead. I'm sorry. I do.
No, you didn't interrupt me at all. I mean, you're helping greatly keep me in line, and you're also saying things that I'd forgot to mention. So
good deal. I'm a pretty great host. I've done this 8 times, so getting my feet under me.
There's not many people I've been interviewed by who. You said 2.5 hours. That blew my mind, because I thought we'd maybe been talking an hour.
No, we go hard, man.
I'm having a good time.
Good, man. That's what I like to hear.
But yeah, God, getting on that topic. If you want me to go ahead and tie it in with Virginia, I'll go ahead and say it.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So I got into searching it, and here's a quick version of it. I'll keep it quick. I found out about the KGC treasure template is what all these people call this. Mm-hmm. It's, like a rhombus with 2 concentric circles, and it's got from corner to corner, there's a line. There's designs in it that they call a lot of the KGC referred to it, or people who say
chicken or
turkey
tracks. Yeah.
Yeah, because it looks like bird feet.
Yeah. I'm gonna pull one up and share it on the screen real quick.
Okay.
See if I can do that real quick.
Yeah, I've got.
You know what's crazy is every time that I search for KGC template, it will come up with every single image of everything having to do with the KGC, and for the and it always takes me like 4 pages to get to that very simple circle with the turkey tracks. It is it's the one thing people want to see and want to like look up when they talk KGC, and like right now I'm having a hard time pulling.
Well, I'll show you. I'm flipping through my. I kept a journal of everything I was working on back when I started on this.
Mm-hmm.
There's like here's my drawing of the KGC template. I don't know if you can see that clearly.
Yeah, that's what we were. Yeah.
So I didn't add. I don't think I added. Yeah, I did add the little turkey tracks to that one. Anyway, so the thing about that, so I found this, I heard from another treasure hunter about the KGC treasure template, and he sent me a copy of it, or told me where to find it. So I went online and I found it, and I thought, okay, there's no scale to this, and I don't know for sure where one is. You'd have to have a starting point, and actually it would make it a lot easier to have more than one starting point. So this happened before I met Wagner Carr. And so we met Wagner Carr. He had his driver show us. I knew where Jesse lived, and I knew there was a treasure somewhere near him. Mm-hmm. Went out. Wagner Carr sent his driver out. She showed us the 3 locations where the treasures were, and George's story on top of that. So now I had multiple locations, known locations, one from George. And the funny thing is, knowing this actually worked out. I loved the way it worked out. I pieced information together from several people. Wagner Carr, the former attorney general, and then George gave me his location and another location near Jesse's, near where Jesse lived. I got on Google Earth. I remember I copied a picture of the template, made it into a transparency, and overlaid it on Google Earth. And I thought, okay, let's play with this and see if anything lines up. It lined up perfectly. Every spot, Wagner Carr's locations and George's locations lined up perfectly. And I thought, oh my God, now I've got it. And there's more locations. And that's a whole nother story. It's hard finding. It's hard. One of the hardest things to do. I'm not going to go on somebody's land and start digging a hole looking for something. It's an easy way to get shot. So, and especially, and that's not even including stories like the KGC that you told me about.
Right.
It's people, and you just don't go.
People in Texas, you don't go walking around in their yard.
Yeah. They'll either shoot at you to scare you, or they'll shoot you.
Can I ask you a quick question? Have you ever found any creepy numbers associated with the maps or anything like that?
There's a lot of numbers associated with the maps, the dimensions, the scale, all of that, but none of it really creeped me out. Like,
okay, I want to show you something real quick.
All right.
And it's part of my research, and it's a little all right, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. There we go. Share. So this is an overhead of the campus of William and Mary, and so I can kind of, let's see here. Oh man, I don't ever do it like this. Anyway, we did a whole episode on the encode of the number 666.
Because is that our second one?
Yeah, that was our second one. And this entire campus is laid out in the number 666.
Yeah.
This is Jamestown Road, the original road in Williamsburg, going from the Jamestown settlement to what became Williamsburg. This is Richmond Road, the road that runs all the way to Richmond, the second settlement. And then right here in this triangle here, actually, This triangle right here is an exact encode of the Great Pyramid of Giza. I got a whole thing on it. I mean, from the point from here to here is the exact distance of the Great Pyramid going from the tip to the bottom. This is the exact of the one of the sides from the tip here to the bell tower, which was the first astronomical observatory in North America. That's the exact encode if you were standing on the floor and measured straight up. And then not only that, if I zoom in here, you know, the yard ends right here. And then Duke of Gloucester Street, kind of the oldest road in Williamsburg, that Bruton Parish is on, which is where Manly P. Hall's wife claimed there was a So this distance from the end of the yard to the very top here is, you know, the pyramid is missing the capstone, but from the yard to the base of Duke of Gloucester Street is the exact measurement of that capstone. And then not only that, if I were to draw a line starting at the base of this William and Mary pyramid and draw it and go all the way to the Great Pyramid of Giza, it runs perfectly down this road and then intersects with the very tip of Duke of Gloucester Street, goes all the way to the Great Pyramid of Giza, and then runs on the exact same corner edge of the Great Pyramid of Giza here. But the reason I was asking you that is that my Kabbalistic tree of life here at William and Mary is Kether. This is the crown. You know, the left side of the tree of life is the feminine. The right side is the masculine. They come up and end here on at the crown. The college is named the campus of it's William and Mary, and that is a marriage of the masculine and feminine, and literally the original building of William and
Mary. Yeah, W.M.
named
William
after
and Mary.
the king and queen, the crown. And and then also these buildings here on the side were originally were female dormitories. Here on the right side on the masculine were the male dormitories. Anyway, but this diamond here, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but they even bent buildings to maintain this diamond. This is 666 times 2, 666 times 2, 666 times 2. And then you see these triangles here. These are exactly 666 feet by 666 feet by 6. And again, you can see they bent buildings to maintain. You know what I'm saying?
It's an important design to whoever.
Also the
sacred, symbolic.
And
also
over.
like what you're saying is Kether of the crown, which I don't disagree with that. The missing capstone would be representative of Ein Sof. Could be.
Explain that.
I mean, that's a fact. But Ein Sof also would, like in Orthodox Judaism, the rabbis would say Ein Sof. You can find it online. God is also referred to as no thing. There's nothing you can say to describe God. He's everything and no thing. And I thought, no thing, I don't know, that popped in my head when you were showing me that. No thing could be the reason for the missing capstone.
That goes back to...
ties in. We all know, 666, everybody's like, that's evil. And I agree. It's got an evil side to it. But it also ties in with Solomon. Like in the Old Testament, they talk about the tithing or the tribute that was paid to God.
666 to Solomon, 666 talents of silver.
Exactly. Of gold. Gold. They paid him. That was the tribute paid to him annually. And I thought,
you consider who Solomon is, and that the Freemasons take their history back all the way to the building of the temple.
And the builders with Hiram Abiff and all of that. But I believe the Bible cover to cover. I know that when people say, "Oh, there's a lot of contradictions," the first time I read it cover to cover, I was looking for loopholes. I was a little kid, And there was
Right.
things I wanted to do. I remember when I was a kid, I would ask mom and she'd tell me to shut up. Don't ever ask that again. I'd say, why is it everything that's fun is bad? And I was always rebellious.
That's
So
what Daniel
anyway,
always says to me.
it's just that, yeah. So anyway, I would read it cover to cover. First time looking for loopholes. Second time checking for anything I missed. And I noticed the second time that there was a lot the second time that I never noticed the first time.
Yeah.
And then the third time I read it cover to cover again, it was more out of interest because it started. It fascinated me. There's symbols in there, and I know a lot. There's a lot of people who are much more or much
Oh
better
yeah.
versed
Can
at the
read
Bible.
into that
Yeah,
numerology that
but
yeah.
not so much numerology, but like the rabbis, Judaism, Kabbalah, and Orthodox Judaism goes hand in hand. They've got a set way of doing it, and I'm not advocating it. If you want to join it, that's fine. I'm a Christian, and that's just what I am. But when the thing about Orthodox Judaism, reading that, researching that, opened my eyes and actually explained a lot of things that most preachers were never able to
Yeah.
answer for me. And that
Well, the
that blew
church
my mind.
well, the
Yeah,
church now is become so sanitized and they
yeah.
completely ignore all the
Good.
supernatural.
I remember I asked a guy, I made him mad, and I had a habit of doing this when I was younger. He was telling, well, that's wrong what you're doing. You should come every Sunday. I said, you look around this congregation and how overweight everybody is. Do they ever give sermons on gluttony? It pissed a lot of people off, but I was defending myself. I felt offended, so I offended them. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff, like you said, it's sanitized. And I'm not a Bible thumper, and when I say I'm a Christian, I'm not the best by far. I'm not,
Well,
I will never claim to be the best by Christian at all, but it opened my eyes to a lot of things.
yeah.
And then so like I was saying earlier, there's parts of it you can get into, and it's almost like you're just a gut instinct. Don't go any further. I don't need to know about that. I don't want to know about that. And
Right.
that's where I just backed off. I thought, okay, I'm satisfied with what I learned for that. My mission is accomplished, and it's almost like it's beckoning you to go deeper, and I don't want to go deeper.
Right. So this template, you have these two places where where you can orient the map, and
Yeah.
then it falls on all these other places.
Well, So, okay, I had the template. I found out that the dimensions of the template, and this was before I got into the symbolism of the dimensions, the miles, the distances, all that. I found out. I thought, okay, well, this fits perfectly on that. And then later on, I found about other locations within the template, and I thought, well, why doesn't the template line up with that? And that's when I was researching Kabbalah, and something about the three veils of negative existence kept popping into my mind. I thought maybe there's more to it. Maybe the template. I found, long story short, there's a small, medium, and large template, which ties in with three veils of negative existence. And then I went further. I got on Google Earth. I thought, okay, so here's this spot. And out of curiosity, I thought, does it go further out? I mean, is this just a template here? Why did they put it here? I didn't have any clue other than maybe because Jesse lived there. But I started looking. I knew of other treasure legends and associated treasures. So I put the template over that. It lined up with those perfect. I found out it made a grid. And I kept doing this grid. I got almost obsessed with it. It's like, God, this could be like every treasure they've ever that just blew my mind. And I went crazy, spent hours covering as much of America on Google Earth with the template, making sure it was all the right dimensions and everything. And it lines up with stone, like not only treasure sites, but areas of like historic significance and mysteries, deep mysteries, like the Los Lunas Decalogue stone in New
Right.
Mexico. got ancient Hebrew writing, and the natives there, when questioned by one of the pioneers, the natives said that was always there as before they were there. And I thought, now how did ancient Hebrew writing get on a stone in New Mexico before the Native Americans were there? There's a lot to history that I think that's happened that we will never know, because history is also sanitized in many ways. It goes against the narrative, just like my experience, my family's experience with Jesse James. People will send you death threats over an Old West outlaw. So,
Right.
so
Yeah.
you start, you get into other stuff, but it lines up with Los Lunas Decalogue Stone, the Kensington Rune Stone that Scott Wolter looked into.
What about the Newport Tower?
Newport Tower in Rhode Island.
Dude, I'm telling you, these are all the Templar, examples of Templar architecture, and the Kensington Rune Stone, the Decalogue, the Newport Tower. These are all things that can't be explained and have been tested and researched. And yeah, they have their detractors and things like that, but some very smart people.
Yeah, and people get really some of those detractors. Well, and it's also, I have a friend who's an author. She's an author in the UK. She's lives, I think, in Norfolk, but anyway, she told me, she warned me before I came out with the first book. She said, anytime you write about it, she said, just be warned, when you write about esoteric topics, expect every lunatic in the world to contact you.
Yeah, I bet, like me.
But, no.
You get an email from this guy.
I had a woman contact me. I can't remember if it was before or after you and I last spoke. Anyway, she wanted me to go out to Arizona because she said my blood would open a portal. And
that sounds like the there's a cult that is surrounded. They learned from the teachings of Manly P. Hall, and they call themselves the Sages of the Seventh Seal.
I've heard of it.
They're the folks who jumped the fence at Bruton Parish in the 90s and tried to find the vault.
It's like they reminded me, when I saw their website or a picture of them on a website, it reminded me of sun worshipers.
Yeah,
I don't know why, they just, that's what the impression I got.
Well, my whole thing, I think all this stuff, when it involves Masonry and Templars and everything, and especially after talking to the guy that I talked to last week, who is doing a lot of work with Templars, and he's writing a book. It's called Shakespeare is Climate Change, and it's just this connection of Shakespeare to and all the references he makes about the Golden Age. Now, during the time of biblical times, when the Nephilim and the fallen angels were on the earth, that's referred to as the Golden Age by
the Titans, when they ruled the earth.
That was the Golden Age. And then when you look at what these secret societies and the knowledge that they're passing down and things like that, and the great work and things like that, I don't want to insult anybody or anything, but and these references to a Golden Age, it
makes you wonder. It makes you wonder,
are they trying to get back to this Golden Age?
That's what I wonder. I've often wondered the same thing, and I still do. I mean, it's just there's a lot of questions, and you get to a point where the answers you're given, if you're given an answer, don't really satisfy you, and it's not the full answer or the right answer. And it's that kind of stuff. But the turkey track, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
That is supposed to be, and I'll mangle the pronunciation of the name, Maimonides. Maimonides is what I call him. Famous Jewish rabbi. That was his design of a menorah. And that to me looks like turkey tracks. I also found other examples of the same design in Mason marks in Scottish churches, studies that were done by universities in Scotland.
That has a specific, watching Oak Island, which ties into William and Mary, and I know it ties into your stuff too. But
Yeah.
Oak Island, they very close to Oak Island, they found again these petroglyphs, these rock carvings, and that just jogged my memory. I remember watching it like a couple years ago, and they found what they were like, it looks like a turkey track, and it's carved into some stone there in Nova Scotia. And then they even went over to some of the Templar castles and sites in Europe and found I think in Portugal actually, and found the exact same markings. But
Yeah.
here,
Boy, and you can also find those similar markings on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, from France, that runs from France down to Santiago, Spain. It was an ancient, before it was pre-Christian. It was a pre-Christian pilgrimage route. I don't know if it was sun worshippers in pagan times, or if it was, but later on, the Christianity took it over as a Christian pilgrimage. And to this day, when it's a famous tourist destination, people go and hike parts of it or the entire thing. But there's a lot of ancient marks, and I've seen they gave it a different meaning. Some people attributed it to witches. Other people said it was a Christian symbol, and they even had the same symbol. They called it a goose foot in different ancient like church ruins and just stones along the route, which I thought was interesting. But I tied it back, in my opinion, it's the Egyptian version of the Tree of Life, the bird track design. It was three lilies, and that ties in with their belief of eternity, and it got distorted.
And the blue water lily, right?
Yeah.
And their ritual of the life and death blue lily psychedelic ritual. That
I don't know about that.
Yeah, so there was I believe it was a blue lily, and they found residue of this blue lily substance in all these different vessels. And I think they've tracked it to Egypt, but I think they also tracked it like through Greece and whatnot, or similar compounds to it. And when you look at all these like mystery schools and stuff, a lot of those contain this psychedelic experience, this initiation experience, where they would a life and death experience, or a rebirth initiation, rebirth. And what that is. And a great way. And our neighborhood friendly fish fry masons, they don't dose people with LSD anymore, but some of those rituals, it's the conjecture is that some of those rituals, those rebirth rituals in masonry and other secret societies and whatnot, it comes directly from the Greek mystery schools and the Egyptian mystery schools, where sometimes they'd give them a cocktail of ergot, or this blue water lily, and they would have this psychedelic experience and this rebirth ritual. Or sometimes there's even some studies where they're finding a lot of horned viper snake venom in the Middle East in some of these things, and they think that part of it was actually, in some of these mystery schools, they would literally bring people to the edge of death.
Yeah.
And then
almost like that movie Flatliners.
Yeah, and then actually and then bring them back. And they've actually found anti-venom. And actually Galen in the ancient Greek wrote a bunch of medical texts, and Galen talks about viper venom and so they were making it anyway, a long way around. But listen, Daniel,
hey,
I think
I gotta run.
I know.
Because I gotta put a screaming baby to bed. So I'll let you guys.
Nice meeting.
Hey, Daniel, this has been a fascinating conversation, though, and now I'm gonna go have to read some of your books. So it was good talking with you. You guys enjoy wrapping up.
All right, brother.
Okay.
All right, love you, man. I'll talk to you later.
I apologize for not speeding up and getting it.
No, it's too much stuff. You've written 3 books, for God's sakes. It's too much stuff. But what I want to do, what the more and more we were talking about it, like getting through the history and getting to this point, the more and more I thought about it as we've been talking, I've just been thinking we need to come back and do another one. And
I'd be happy to.
And we'll get those visuals. You can either send them to me and I can put them in a slideshow. And then as you're talking, we can go through them and we can really like,
All right.
be able to give some.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to go buy a better camera. So if I buy a better camera and I use Zoom on my laptop, then I can just show the images there, like easier.
Yeah, you can just share your screen. There's so down at the bottom, if you well, you're on your phone, so it might be a little bit different, but down on the screen you're looking at now, there should be a little green box that says share somewhere on there, and that gives you the ability to share whatever's on your screen.
Okay.
So
I'm much better at desktops and laptops. I rarely use the phone.
So I'll tell you this: get you a $25 HD webcam off of Amazon. I just had that's all we use here. I literally got one in today. They're fine for it.
All right.
And then and then you'll all be contained in one one place.
Good. Man, there's a lot to talk about. I mean,
we could do another 3 hour.
Okay.
Let's plan on getting, if you're willing in a maybe a couple of weeks or so, and we'll come back and we'll give them a part 2.
All right.
People love it. I'll tell you what, I mean, we usually do about between 1.5 to 2.5 hours, but these are the podcasts that I love. Like I usually run through the normal podcasts that I listen to, and if it's under like an hour, if it's a 45-minute podcast, I usually don't even stop on it, because I'm a dork, man. I want to get into the real stuff. I don't want to just hear the surface of like what I can read on the back cover of your book. Like I want to
dive into it.
Yeah.
That's how I am. When I'm interested in a topic, the glossed over shallow version is not what interests me. I want to know the details. It's constantly asking why.
Yeah.
And I just keep going, and it drives me crazy. I used to drive my mom crazy when I was a kid, just constantly asking questions and digging deeper. And anyway, everything we were talking about, it always seems like, not just with you, with everybody I've talked to, it's like I said, overlapping spider webs, and it seems to be non-ending.
When you get into this,
I've still not found all the answers. I haven't even come close, in my opinion, to finding all the answers.
When you get into this stuff, and like I said, I've been approached by Masons who were like, "Hey, man, all this stuff." I've done talks at one of the oldest lodges in Virginia.
That's cool.
They were super nice, and literally they introduced me as, "Hey, listen to this guy. He knows more about our history than any of us." They were excited to have me, and I did my whole Great Pyramid of Giza presentation for them, and they were pretty, and the kind of Masonic history of Williamsburg, and they were kind of blown away. But what I was saying is, when you get into this stuff, to the outsider, it sounds like you're
wacky.
Off your rocker and you're just connecting dots that aren't there. But
I laughed about this with my sister.
These people have been passing this information down for a reason. If not,
and it's also it sounds, people sound like they're off the rocker and batshit crazy, basically. But I've been called batshit crazy, literally. Just
look at the way I look.
I'm like, I really don't care. Yeah, I'm crazy, and I'm planning on getting crazier. But no, there's just it's a whole different world. There's what people refer to as reality, and then there's what I think of as reality, which is a whole different ball game. I mean, I believe in spirits, Nephilim, there's a lot of entities and creatures that I believe exist. I don't know if they're all good. I mean, if they're all bad, some may be good or they may be posing as good. I don't know. But there's a lot of questions. I've seen things that seem like they would be good. It's like it didn't try to hurt me, but or is that to pique my curiosity and get me to dig deeper and follow the wrong trail?
Well, and like I said, there have been organizations and groups that have passed this stuff down and created entire mechanisms and processes to be able to pass this down for thousands of years. There's a reason for that. It's not just for funsies. You know what I mean?
No, it's not.
It is taken deadly serious by some of the most powerful and interesting and educated people on the planet. That means something. And anybody who brushes it off as woo-woo, even if it is just
the fact
woo-woo
that they
and it's all
without
fake,
knowing anything. And I've told a guy once, it was one of the guys in town. I grew up with his son. I said, he said something like treasure my ass. And he caught me. I shouldn't have said it. It was disrespectful. He was older than me, all that. But I was in a horrible mood. And he said that out of the blue. I wasn't talking about it. He just came out and just said that. And I said, in my opinion, anyone who makes a decision without knowing anything about it is a fool. Yeah. And I thought, you're not supposed to call people fool. And I shouldn't have said that to him, but it came out. And that's how I view that. People who they're going to call you crazy, and it may be, like you said, some things may be crazy, but when they don't know a thing about it and haven't even bothered to research it, and they just label it that, I think there's different reasons. Some people just don't want to believe it. Other people, it scares. My brother, it scares him to death. He accused me of selling my soul.
Well, yeah,
because I figured out the template.
I think there's people who just, knowledge and a desire for knowledge. It's a spectrum, and I think there's people who are happy with things on the regular, and let's not, you know what I mean? And sometimes I wish I was one of those people and they had never been given by an ex-girlfriend's mother the book Angels and Demons by Dan Brown, because that's what opened it up for me. And I was like, from then on, I was like, oh wait, I knew it was fiction, but I said, even if an eighth of this is based in any kind of, even a fraction of this is based in any kind of fact. If one of these organizations that they're talking about is true, and they have done these kind of things, and it's not known it's known but not really talked about, that is crazy.
Remember the guy I mentioned
these days? It's old hat talking about the Skull and Bones and Masons and the Illuminati. I mean, it's just a word now. But the fact that these things existed and happened in history, and the fact that they're never talked about, well, I mean, they're talked about now, but for so long it was kept so under the rug, is infinitely interesting to me. That how could you not want to know more?
Why did they stay unknown for so many centuries or decades or however long, and then suddenly decide to be known?
I think we're getting to the end of an age.
I do too. Yeah. And they call it the coming of the golden age. And that's another thing. I don't like talking politics. I've got friends who are rabid liberals, and I've got friends who are crazy ass, both extremes. Everything in between. I try not to judge people. It's like, you've got your reasons for being a Democrat, you've got yours for being a Republican. I'm a libertarian, basically, but just because it's a nice middle ground and it keeps me out of a lot of fights. People ask me, what party are you? Libertarian. They don't know what to say. They either think you're crazy for being a libertarian, or they don't know anything about it, so it keeps you out of argument. But remember I told you about Matt? Oh, and before I get on that topic, back to the libertarian politic thing, Trump. I like Trump. I like a lot of things he's done. I don't know why. I just like it. It's probably the way I was raised, conservative in Texas, and I don't feel I need to defend it. But anyway, I like a lot of the stuff he's done. But there was one thing he's been saying: a new golden age for America. And when he said golden age, I thought, I don't know if that's good or bad. I really don't.
You know.
I don't know. And there's some weird stories about him in that old book, Baron Trump and Don.
Yeah. Oh, that's another rabbit hole. And then his his uncle was the guy who was, given all of Tesla's devices by the FBI to see if there was anything to any of them. And then all of a sudden, but listen, man, I think that's as good a place to end it as any.
All right.
We will be in touch, and I'm going to get you back on here as soon as possible. As soon as you're ready, let's do another one, and we'll...
Whenever you're ready. I'm serious. If you want to do it tomorrow, I'm up for that, or if it's 2 weeks or a week or whenever, I'm up for it. So
I'll get with you. I'll get with you sometime this week, and we'll get it set again.
All right. Sounds good. And I'll talk to you,
man. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Thank you guys for watching. Have a great one, brother.
You too.
All right.